So welcome everybody. Hello. Great of you to join us today on this webinar, all about what we can do to make 2026 your safest year yet. We tried to slap you around the face with what the webinar is about in terms of the outcomes that we're going to try and give you some insights on today. Really excited about this. It was something that we've been working on for a while now, bringing together three really fantastic speakers, and then you'll have to put up with me as well, but hopefully I will not drag the side down too much. And we're going to cover a really wide and varied agenda for you today. The structure of the day is going to be a couple of talks after my very brief, and don't worry, it will be brief, preamble. Louise is going to talk and then Davey. Then we'll have a very short break, and Davey's going to be very prescriptive as to how long that break will last for. Don't worry. And then Carla and myself will give you some ideas about what we can do to make 2026 your safest year yet. And then we'll finish up with a panel discussion. So I'll chair a sort of panel discussion with everybody. We'll ask some questions about general themes and then pick up on some of the topics that we've covered throughout the day. But also, there'll be an opportunity for you throughout the day to pose questions, and particularly at that end session as well. There'll absolutely be the opportunity to make this kind of an interactive session, and really, we're here to try and make sure that you get the most out of this. So, whatever you want to raise, then feel free, and we'll do our best to answer that question and give you a good answer and a good platform to move forward. Just a couple of thanks. Thanks to everybody that shared this on LinkedIn or other social media platforms. We really do appreciate that, because that's helped to spread the word. Thanks to HSE people, because they shared this a couple of times as well. And you will be getting, after today, we'll send you a copy of the recording. We'll also send you a bit of a digital goodie bag too, which will include various resources that you can benefit from to make the most of this. So with that, I'm going to introduce Louise, or Louise is going to introduce herself actually. But Louise, great to see you. And you've been on a interesting break at the moment. So tell us a little bit about that, and then how that's kind
Yeah,
of led you to getting to the point of what you're going to talk about today.
yeah. So I'm gonna sort of head straight in because I'm a bit worried about my tech. I have been on a bit of a break, which has been great for me actually. And it's meant that I've really been able to sort of go away and think about some new concepts and some new ideas. So yeah, really excited to be here. And it's been a while since I've presented. So, good morning, everybody. And for those of you who don't know me, my background spans environmental health, safety, and organizational leadership across public, private, and professional settings. I've led national transformation work. I've served as president and chair of council at IOSH, and I've worked with boards, executive teams, and governance professionals navigating complexity and change. And as we've said, over the past few months, I've actually taken some deliberate time away to reflect on some of the patterns that I've seen across organizations, and particularly how leadership decisions accumulate over time to shape culture, performance, and trust. And that reflection is what has led to the development of this choice chain presentation. And by the way, if you would like copies of the slides, I can release them next week. Just connect and message me on LinkedIn quoting choice chain. So I'm currently exploring my next executive or advisory role, particularly where organizations are dealing with complexity, growth, or governance evolution. And what I bring is the ability to align governance, risk, culture, and operational delivery. So strategy genuinely lands and we shift that dial. So today's session is the first time I've presented on the choice chain, and this draws directly from my experience. So before I begin the presentation, I just wanted to go through a few definitions. So first of all, I'm going to be talking about sustainability. And sustainability in this presentation is not only about environment and climate crisis. Sustainability for me is very much around the UN definition of sustainability. So it's meeting the present without compromising the future. I'm going to be using the term signals within the presentation. And again, here, this indicates inputs, messaging, observations. I'm going to be talking about capitals. So when we talk about capital, we might be referring to natural capital, human capital, societal capital, manufactured capital, and financial capitals. And when those things are all in balance within an organization, we can achieve that first one, which is around sustainability. I'm going to be talking quite a bit about governance in this session. So large organizations have a governing body or board, and then they're likely to have board subcommittees and layers of management below this, beginning with the CEO and the executive team. Your organization may not have all of this and might have a much simpler approach to governance. Governance maturity directly impacts accountability. So it's really important when we're talking about choices and decisions. So through my work with governance teams and in safety leadership, I've developed a way of describing what I repeatedly see play out in complex organizations. And I'm referring to this as the choice chain. This is a sequence of interconnected decisions across different levels that ultimately determine organizational choices made and therefore their outcomes. And that's what I'm calling choice chain. Because environmental health, safety, and well-being is rarely shaped by just one decision. It's shaped by a chain of choices across multiple levels. So, the choice chain. If safety performance keeps plateauing, the issue probably isn't our effort. Across many sectors, activity and spend in safety is increasing. More audits, more training, more reporting, more information, more guidance, more complexity, more safety stuff. Yet outcomes remain stubbornly flat in many areas, and we continue to feel unheard. That's not just frustrating, that's data, and it is telling us something important. In complex organizations facing competing pressures and constant change, effort alone doesn't shift results. What matters is how decisions are being made at each level. When I spoke about putting the heart into health and safety during my time as IOSH president, my post-pandemic focus was on compassion, people, and human capital. But I've come to realize something else. Compassion, care, culture, and capability can't change outcomes on their own. What also matters is how decisions are made, the choice chain, especially in complex systems where priorities collide and trade-offs are a constant. If we want safer, healthier, and more sustainable organizations, it's time to move beyond activity and start asking the harder questions about leadership, governance, and what really drives safety performance. I've always believed change happens one conversation at a time. When we raise a safety concern, it rarely comes alone and often intersects into a multitude of other areas. We have the ability to raise the tide across our organizations, and this has always been a personal driver for me. But this also means it is competing with financial pressure, transformational fatigue, regulatory scrutiny, and strategic uncertainty. So our leaders pause. This pause reflects the reality that repositioning safety at a strategic level can disrupt existing incentives, capital flows, and current performance measurement. Leaders hesitate because the ripple effects are uncertain. In highly complex situations, leaders don't ask, is this right? They're asking, what's this going to trigger? I'm increasingly convinced the future of safety depends on what organizations decide after our safety conversations. The decisions that are made when we leave the room and in a wider context. So what might the potential causes of this plateau be? First of all, leaders can get stuck. And I'm going to argue this isn't through neglect, but through psychological and structural pressure. They are balancing competing risks, financial performance, reputational risk, political dynamics, including conflicting stakeholder perceptions, operational continuity, and personal accountability. Signal absorption is when warnings are discussed, documented, but then deferred rather than converted into decisive action. Continuation bias reflects the tendency to stay on the current path, even when warning signals appear. Admitting change is needed can feel like admitting fault, even when we're simply evolving. Meanwhile, that drift continues. If our safety messaging is implying oversight gaps, insufficient controls, unsafe culture, or previous decisions that were flawed, this is translated as an identity threat to being a competent steward, a responsible director, a safe pair of hands, and a financial guardian. When this happens, the brain shifts into defense mode. People rationalize, delay, reframe, or minimize. That's not conscious, it's neurological. Research in behavioral psychology shows that when self-concept is threatened, individuals prioritize self-protection over accuracy. And that's why good people appear to resist. Continuation bias is about the tendency to continue a course of action despite emerging warning signals, because change creates uncertainty, and uncertainty feels riskier than the drift. And admitting we need to change implies we did something wrong, so the drift accumulates. Capital trade-offs mean financial pressure can outweigh human risk signals in decision conversations. And the altitude translation gap is going to be something that I come on to talk about. As safety professionals, we speak in incidents and compliance. Leadership actually listens for organizational risk exposure, cost, continuity, and stability. If we don't translate out our altitude, our safety messages weaken. So, how do decisions shape outcomes? We know major failures are rarely single mistakes. They're a sequence of seemingly reasonable and rational decisions that are made under pressure and within a structure that leaders understand. Warnings regarding the structural integrity of the Vale Dam in Brazil were being raised many years before its catastrophic collapse in 2019, which devastated the environment. 270 people died. Penalties and costs ran into the billions. In the UK, the tragedy at Grenfell Tower in 2017 tells a similar story. The subsequent Grenfell Tower inquiry and the independent review led by Dame Judith Hackett highlighted not a single reckless act, but systemic failure, fragmented accountability, cost pressures, regulatory ambiguity, and warnings raised but not effectively acted upon. 72 people lost their lives. The issue was not the absence of rules, it was how decisions accumulated across procurement, oversight, compliance, and governance structures over time. Other factors: resource defensiveness. When budgets are tight, safety improvement can be framed as a cost rather than protection of value. Protection of value means safeguarding human life and capability, or human capital. It also protects long-term reputation, investor and stakeholder confidence, regulatory license to operate, and operational continuity. Safety investment is not a cost. Try framing it as a protection of organizational durability. Governance fragility exposure. This acknowledges systemic risk will often reveal weakness in oversight, assurance, or organizational structures. It surfaces weak processes, inadequate board oversight, and gaps in reporting lines and ambiguity in accountability. Now, this matters because directors have personal legal duties, and admitting this fragility can often feel like admitting liability. So it's safer psychologically to narrow the issue. Organizational structures influence the choice chain. When governance structures dilute accountability, culture adapts to the ambiguity. Safety messages then stall because no one feels responsible and no one feels empowered to make a decision. Defensive cognition. When reputation or operational threat rises, decision framing narrows. Consider the Challenger space shuttle disaster in 1986. Engineers raised concerns about O-ring failure in cold temperatures. Under pressure and high reputational stakes, leaders narrowed the framing and proceeded to the launch with catastrophic consequences. Risk governance cascade. Board signals influence. Executives shape incentives, which in turn shape management priority, KPIs, and frontline reality. It turns into the culture of how we do things. If there is misalignment in the governance pathway, there is potentially a power imbalance which can be highly damaging. This creates misalignment in the choice chain. Purpose and strategy is lost in translation, and this is when direction is lost in safety messaging because they disappear between levels. Modern governance is increasingly recognizing that organizational success depends on multiple forms of capital: financial, human, societal, and natural, in balance. Long-term value depends on the health of people and planet, not just profit. Safety professionals already protect human capital. And if you work in environmental health, this extends into societal and community health impacts too. So by reframing safety as protection of multiple capitals, we start to align ourselves with the direction of modern governance is moving. Our challenge as safety leaders is to reframe our messaging in a language that each level understands. This is important as part of our stakeholder engagement work. So, we know boards or governing bodies set organizational purpose and risk appetite. They're going to be asking questions like, does this affect long-term value, trust, reputation, and our reason to operate? The executive team will translate this into strategy and incentives. The board holds them to account in respect of their delivery. They will be asking, what is our exposure to disruption, cost, and instability? Managers turn strategy into operational behaviours, targets, and delivery. They're going to be asking, are we compliant and meeting our deliverables? And those on the front line are going to be asking, is this safe for me? So thinking about our language, I've taken some phrases that I know that I use quite regularly and started to think about how this translates into those different governance groups. So this is very much meant to promote a discussion, and we can, I'm sure that there'll be ways that you are phrasing things that may help you in your particular scenarios as well. So common comment that I might make, we need to utilize all our data, not just incident data and lagging indicators. So if we're talking to the board, we might say, we need leading indicators that show exposure before it becomes a financial loss. In the executive level, we need early warning indicators to reduce operational disruption and unexpected cost. Managers, if we act early, we prevent firefighting later. And on the front line, if we spot issues early, we stop someone being hurt. We might say we have 3,000 incidents a year and this is where our effort is being spent. If we're talking to the board, this volume of operational disruption indicates a more systemic exposure, not isolated events. To the executive, this concentration of effort is reducing operational efficiency. Manager, the volume of individual issues suggests a process breakdown, not just localized issues. Frontline, this isn't random, something in the system isn't working. And the last one, we say this is about our people and putting them first. Board, this is about our organizational capacity and our long-term resilience. Executive, this is about protecting organizational capability. Manager, this is about performance and delivery. Frontline, this affects your safety and your well-being. Now, these are just examples, and I would add to this that you probably naturally find that you are able to communicate much more strongly at a particular level. And you may have a mismatch in communications in other levels, and this may be reflective of your personal style. So take some time to consider that. And even in doing these slides, I've certainly considered that myself as well. So I often hear from safety professionals, and actually there was a comment made in one of the shared posts regarding this webinar that prompted this as well, that leaders only care about money. I'm not sure that I believe this. I don't believe they make intentional decisions which lead to harm. If we say this, they are more than likely to switch off. Instead, try suggesting capital allocation decisions are complex. I'm aware you're balancing liquidity, investor and stakeholder confidence, growth, and operational stability. How can we work together on this? Respect precedes influence. Meet them where they are. Work to understand their position and listen to hear. By reframing our language, we're protecting the organization's capital space, which aligns with modern governance thinking for long-term sustainability. So help our leaders see the hidden financial exposure. Most boards focus on visible costs, such as project overruns, direct accident costs, and insurance premiums. but they underweight hidden exposures such as talent attrition, productivity loss, investor risk, legal risk, regulatory investigation, and long-term brand erosion. So perhaps ask the question, where do you see risk sitting in your balance sheet where it isn't visible yet? Keep asking questions and offering choices. Guide them along a journey. It may be obvious to you, but not necessarily to them. Our challenge in safety improvements often sits between operational expenditure, capital expenditure. We don't have a direct return on investment category, and we may need multi-year investment for our initiatives. Leaders in financially constrained environments can feel trapped by shareholder expectation, personally accountable for financial performance, and exposed if there is financial result slip. If you imply safety is more important than finance, they hear you should sacrifice financial performance, and that activates defensive cognition. Instead, say, the organizations that sustain financial performance are often the ones that reduce systemic risk early. Now you're aligning safety with financial durability. Clear, transparent communication, influence, empathy. We often pull these together as soft skills, but they're not soft, they're power skills, because in complex systems, influence determines outcomes. If you can't influence decisions at the right altitude, technical expertise remains operational, not strategic, and not a board priority. This isn't just a safety issue. Engineering, cybersecurity, sustainability, compliance, all technical disciplines experience the same frustration. They generate data, and these professionals raise warnings too. But without translation into financial and strategic language, our message is weakened. The issue is not safety, it's decision framing. It's about the choice chain. Regulators, investors, communities, and employees directly shape organizational risk exposure. Collaboration means slowing down, listening, and building shared ownership rather than escalating urgency alone. There will always be low-hanging fruit and short-term quick wins, but it's important to articulate time for this stage before any transformational program begins. Your influence precedes any reform, and this is important. Check in and keep checking in, considering your language at each stage. I've raised issues with key stakeholders only to go into meetings to find that they have a complete 180-degree turnaround. The first time this happened to me was 25 years ago, and it shocked me. It still occurs, it still shocks and surprises me, but it still occurs. Sustainable transformation is rarely a 6-month initiative. Year one builds trust and builds alignment. Without that foundation, rapid change often collapses under resistance. Trust is now a measurable risk variable. Loss of trust accelerates reputational and financial consequences. Think about what happens with the 2015 Volkswagen emissions scandal, which led to €30 billion penalties and settlements, share collapse, and long-term brand damage. The Endelman Trust Barometer shows how declining trust reduces customer loyalty. Conversely, research shows high trust environments outperform low trust environments. Sustainable organizations consider all their stakeholders for long-term stability, not only those who want a quick financial return. The World Economic Forum identifies geopolitical instability, misinformation, and societal polarization as current leading global risks. This increases volatility. Volatility increases decision pressure, and under pressure, continuation bias becomes stronger. That's why safety is feeling harder right now. But volatility also increases the value of resilient governance. So it also becomes more strategically important for us to align and demonstrate the value our work brings at every level. So some top tips, top finance tips. Liquidity and finance matter, but unmanaged safety risk eventually becomes financial risk. The question isn't safety versus finance, it's whether we recognize safety as part of financial capital protection before the balance sheet forces a conversation. Safety operates on moral argument. Conversely, finance on risk-adjusted returns. By shifting our language, we enter the same space. We show money is being exposed through safety. So my top tips: look for ways to make risk visible in a financial language. Shift to risk exposure language. Ask questions. What would a catastrophic event cost us? Reposition to continuity protection, investor reassurance, long-term value. Invite joint ownership. How do we create long-term value together? Translate before you escalate and give this the time it needs, altering your style for board, executive, manager, and the front line. Frame safety as a protection of financial capital rather than cost. Understand what leaders are protecting and the psychology behind this. Understand how your organization is governed. Align safety with board purpose, risk appetite, and long-term value creation rather than a standalone technical issue. Don't just measure against your regular KPIs. Trace how decisions are actually being made, where safety signals weaken, and how incentives in your organization are actually shaping behaviors. That's where transformation really sits. One conversation at a time builds awareness around what we do, but awareness must travel through the choice chain, through incentives, through structures, and via good governance pathways, or it stalls. This shifts safety from operational compliance to strategic oversight. It invites leaders to examine what they protect when risk signals challenge stability. Change starts with a conversation, but performance shifts when leaders decide something different. Every leadership decision sends a signal across the organization. Over time, those signals become culture. Governance isn't paperwork. It's the architecture of the choice an organization makes. We don't wake up to broken systems. We build them one reasonable decision at a time. Thank you. Thank you. So, questions?
If anybody wants to be brave, it's a Zoom meeting rather than a Zoom webinar. So you could go to reactions, raise your hand, and unmute yourself and come and ask Louise a question if you want to do that. Or of course, you could pop something into the chat as well. So Maurice has raised his hand. So go ahead.
Good afternoon. Hope all is well.
Hi, Maurice.
Sorry, I'm in a public place in the UAE, and the laws here are very strict with letting other people be captured on video. So my video is off.
That's fine.
Quick question. You mentioned about designing a safety maturity model which aligns with organizational objectives to make it easier to sell the idea. Can you give me a practical example how I would do that?
Yeah, so I'm sure everybody on the call is familiar with the Bradley curve. And if you're not familiar with the Bradley curve, give it a Google, because it's worth looking at. And the Bradley curve looks at organizational maturity in respect of safety. So it starts with I don't know if you can, I've got work going on in the background here. It starts with very low maturity, which is a reactive state, and moves into how an organization becomes proactive over time. And this model is really important because when we're looking at organizations and looking at how we achieve transformational change, we have to follow the steps. And so one of the areas that I feel is very useful is if you can take the concepts of the Bradley curve and actually translate that into your organization directly. So you make it very specific to your organization. And if you look at maturity models exist across business. And I've been looking at governance maturity models recently as well, because again, if you have an organization with low governance maturity, those good governance pathways may not be in existence yet. And we really need those good governance pathways to support our work. So creating a maturity model that's very specific to your organization, but based on something like the Bradley curve, can be really useful. And it also indicates to leaders, this is where we're going. This is where we are now. This is where we're going. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, Louise. That's clear. Thanks.
There's a question in the chat, Louise. Being I'm an existing IOSH chartered member, is this covered under Blueprint?
Well, hi, Stephen. The presentation that I've just are you asking, is this presentation covered in Blueprint? So I'm no longer. So I was IOSH president in 2022, and I believe in change, and there's a fantastic presidential team driving change forward in IOSH as it is at the moment. I'm not a member at the moment. I don't know whether there's anything in Blueprint around governance. I'm sure that there is some self-learning around governance. The choice chain presentation that I've given you, this is the first time that I've presented on this. And it's because I've been given this gift of reflection over the last few months. I've really been reflecting on how and why these decisions get made based on, I've been in this gig for 35 years now. So it's given me kind of a opportunity to reflect. And so this choice chain presentation, I haven't presented before, it's new. So this as a topic won't be in Blueprint. You're hearing it now for the first time. Yeah,
good stuff.
Tiffany's just said there's lots in Blueprint regarding governance, which I would expect. Thanks, Tiff.
Yeah, we're giving you all new exclusive material on today's session. So thanks. Any further questions for Louise?
Oh, Stephen's just asking in the chat, how do we get over the through the fogging of over governors? Yeah, so that can, Stephen, that happens as well, is that I've worked in organizations with governance structures that would absolutely blow your mind. And you know, I can see the change. I can see what's going on in particularly when we think about what's happening in the wider world about ethics and ethical standards and making ethical decisions. that is all tied up around governance as well. So I think governance is something that's gaining in importance. And I think some organizations, and we see this in safety, is we throw everything at it, and we end up with very, very complex governance structures that have probably been added to and built over time. And I've worked with some organizations that have massive governance structures. And I'm a bit of, I like a bit of governance. I call myself a bit of a governance geek, and I've struggled to find my way around it. So in the same way, governance professionals are going to be looking at that for sure. Our challenge is we've got to meet our organizations where they are, and it's, how can we find somebody to guide us through that structure where it is highly complex. Any other questions?
There's one in the chat, Louise.
Yeah, what exactly safety leaders can do in their organisation to promote a positive and strong safety culture. So I gave you a few quick tips at the end of the talk. I think as safety professionals, we need to really plan in advance and use that, take time in building trust and influence with your various stakeholder groups. So, do some stakeholder mapping, spend some time on that up front. That's certainly a reflection that I've had from roles that I've worked within. And what tends to happen is people say, we want transformation, we want this to happen quickly, and you want to deliver what they're asking for, but actually long-term change takes time, and it, particularly in complex environments. So it's look for those quick wins that you can achieve, but actually work with the leadership to build that solid plan for the future. Any other question? And we're on time, Christian.
We're on time, yeah. Well done, Louise. You're setting a great example for the rest of us.
So am I introducing Davey?
Yeah, why don't you introduce Davey? Although Davey seems to have disappeared, so hopefully he's around. Oh, there he is.
So yeah, I mean, if there are any other questions, connect with me on LinkedIn. If you'd like some copies of the PowerPoint, I need to add some of my references, which I'm going to do. So send me a note on LinkedIn and quote Choice Chain, and I will send you a PDF of the slides next week. So I'm going to now introduce Davey. So Davey Snowden MBE is a former weightlifting world record holder and Olympic strength and conditioning expert who has served as a national coach for the British weightlifting team. As the founder and CEO of Pristine Condition International Limited, he has revolutionized manual handling training, achieving unprecedented injury reduction across global industrial and commercial sectors. For his significant contributions to the health and well-being of the nation, he was awarded an MBE in 2014 by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II, which is hugely impressive. Davey, over to you.
Thank you, Louise. And what was really interesting to see was that a couple of people joined from Newcastle. So I've got the confidence in the world that there's at least two can understand Geordie. So that's a cracking start. If anybody else doesn't understand it, I'm sure we'll get some translations coming through. But I'd like to share a journey we've been on for it's 30 years this year now. So what it was, was when it comes to health and safety, if you're in health and safety, you kind of understand it. And I'm sure most people watching this webinar are in it and understand it. But what we found was when you go to the cold face, there's such a disconnect. And when you think about, I mean, if you look at today now, right, the pressures that are on domestic life, the significant strain on finances, all the cost of living's gone up, pressures of relationships, the waiting list for anything you want to do, or anywhere you're going. Then you go to work, and businesses have got these financial constraints as well. So they might have to do it in short, there might be time constraints in that. And people have got this job and they go, hey, I've got my job. I don't want to change. I don't want any more pressures. I'm just about coping. And we come along and start talking about health and safety. And they go, what? That's health and safety's department, isn't it? They do that. I'm all right. I'm okay. And that disconnect is something we've been able to bridge, and so proud of it for nearly 30 years now. But it actually happened by mistake, and I'd love to share that journey with you. My background was weightlifting, and I got back from Atlanta in 1996, the Olympics. And our centre of excellence is Bishop Abbey, Marlow, down in Buckinghamshire. And there was a massive paper mill across the river. And the biggest cause of their accidents was through lifting and handling. And someone says, why don't you get that world record weightlifter to come and have a look? I said, well, I'd love to. So I went waltzing into this paper mill, and it was like a time warp. There's these big rollers going round and steam coming out. And I remember saying, I haven't got a clue what you're doing here. But walked around the corner and saw this guy picking up a chunky piece of equipment, which I now know is a cord dog going in the end of the big reels. And I says, well, no wonder you're getting injuries, he's picking that up wrong. What do you mean? They said, he's bending his legs to keep his back straight. I says, well, which idiot told him to do that? I had no idea there's regulations. I says, can I have a chat with him? And he says, yeah, fill your boots. So, mate, would you humour me? Show me how you pick that up again, would you? And I let him get it 4 inches off the ground. I said, stop, stay still. Do you feel any discomfort here, here, and here? He looked at me and said, every day, mate. Put it down, I said. I changed one hand and 1 foot position. I says, pick it back up now. Got him to the same 4 inches, paused him again and said, I bet you don't feel the discomfort now though, do you? And if I never moved from this spot again, he put it down, he stood up, he said, do you know, mate, I've worked here 16 bleep years, and that's the first bleep thing that bleep has made sense, bleep, bleep. The union goes, shall we walk on, dearie? See, I wasn't looking at what he was doing as a job. I hadn't got a clue what it meant. I was looking at the body. See, all the time I was involved in weightlifting, I wanted to understand what weightlifting was. And I used to always say to the coach, that first movement, easing the bar backwards, seems so, why, coach, why? So I studied the history of Olympic weightlifting coaching, and it took us back to the 1600s when Richard Joy was doing strongman feats for King William III, and all the scientific changes in weightlifting to the modern day, because it's now considered to be anatomically and mechanically perfect, and studying the human body at the same time. So when I went in this paper mill, I looked at the muscles in the body, which were working in which plane and axis, pressures on it, and I'm just trying to do the science of weightlifting to take the pressure off the body, doing the job they were doing. But you know, the biggest benefit of all wasn't even that. It was the fact that the guy could physically feel the difference, and there entered the change. I mean, when we talk about changing habits, behaviour change, culture shifts, and all of these words, we've been banging this drum for year after year, decade after decade, but we've got to understand people don't want to change. This is my comfort zone. Leave me alone. I'm happy with this. Why do I have to do that? I've got to find a new skill. There's nothing focuses the mind like pain. This, guys, that hurts me. I can feel a discomfort. That don't. I remember one time we were working on the railways, and there was a foreman down there, strapping, massive guy was. His name was Mike, and he's laying troughing down by the side. But it's a bit like a 4 foot concrete trough by a foot that they put the cables in. laying hundreds and hundreds of meters of it. And he's like this, eyebrows like that. I've done this job for 16 years. What's they going to teach me? But don't want to teach you now, Mick. Can I have a go? Lay 20, 30 meters with him. I noticed you're doing that different, mate. I says, yeah, I'm inside base, you're outside. I says, I tell you what, let's not lay the next one. Let's just keep a hold of it. So again, paused. He actually started shaking after about 20 seconds. The pressure was that much on the body. Try it my way. Is there a difference? Wow. That was discomfort. That wasn't. Do you know it's the best behaviour change program you will ever get? Nothing focuses the mind like pain. And what we found was another human trait came into it. People want to be associated with something that's successful. So all of a sudden you had all these myths and fallacies like wear a belt to support your back. It doesn't, never has done, never will. It's not what it's there for. It's actually for the abdominal muscles, for when you're lifting. So you bring another muscle group into play to exert more force. You lift wrong, you can wear 20 belts, it ain't going to support it. You're going to get hurt. Fact. And this buy-in, I can feel a difference. So all of a sudden, this guy there who was with the railway, we went down to work with some signallers, came back 5 hours later. He's given a team talk to his group. I've done this for 16 years and I'm telling you, this is the way we lay troughing. It's what we said 5 hours earlier. It was brilliant. See, another problem you've got in the industry is you don't want to be picked on or you don't want to be singled out. So if I'm going to start a new job and I've got someone I'm going to be working with, I don't want to be picked on by them. So I'll copy what they do. The biggest problem with lifting and handling in the industry is the body doesn't tell you when you lift wrong. Hasn't got that set up. It only tells you when you've lifted wrong too many times. And we get all sorts of conjecture involved in that as well, because people say, I hurt my shoulder picking up a remote control. I hurt the lower back doing this. I feel a pull in the chest. It's not that, that's the final straw. It's all the other things that were being done that leading up to it, the straw that breaks it comes back. So when you're investigating this in business, you go, well, the injury happened there, but the cause of it could have been here, here, and here. And that's what you can address when you know what you're talking about with. And what was really interesting was, because the body doesn't tell you, this conjecture comes in, I'm copying what my colleague's doing, and all of a sudden you get incorrect techniques self-perpetuating throughout the business. And therefore with that, the increased injuries. But all of a sudden, we've got one of the biggest culture changes ever, managing it by pain. That hurts me, that doesn't. I'll do it that way. This feels great. I'm going to share this with colleagues, and you get correct techniques self-perpetuating throughout the business. And with that alone, we were getting 50% reduction as a minimum in organizations we're going into. It is incredible. So one of the biggest things is take the pressure off the body. Look at the body, not the job. What was really fascinating for me was, I remember when I started off and speaking with a load of sort of insurance companies and things like that. And they said, but you're just a weightlifter. Love it. Thanks, mate. Yeah, great. Fast forward 15 years, you're now running sessions with the HSE, and it's actually now being scientifically proven as actual factual advice. And I mean, the amount of court cases we've won, because you can't argue with science and you can't argue with facts. It's not my opinion. But the biggest thing is the delivery. And that's where I like to give people some advice on in the journey that we've shared is it's all about the delivery. See, so many people will come in and start doing some types of training things. Is you've got to base it on the end user. Because so all of ours is practically based. If you go into an organisation where there's a 3-foot ditch and 6 inches of water where they work, guess where we do the training? In that 3-foot ditch, in that 6 inches of water. There was a great one when we were working with an electrical company, and imagine 170 feet in the air, right? You're on a platform 2 foot wide, 15 foot long. You've got a 30-kilo clip, and you've got to put it on the cable there. Then you've got to put the next one on the next cable, and it's out there. Now, we all know 10 kilo here is like 40 kilo there. 30 kilo here, 120 kilos worth of pressure on the body. Wow. One of their biggest causes of injuries. This is where you could bring Olympic weightlifting into it, you see, because there's 4 key principles you can apply to anything, which is now being proved to take 70% pressure off the body every day. You see, when you're lifting, the highest you can pull a bar is you drive it, you bring it up, and you go on your toes and shrug your shoulders. That's the highest level I can bring the bar. To drop underneath and catch that, it's not high enough. But when you're pulling it, you drive with power, which is strength times speed. So even though you stop, the bar continues to rise because you've created the momentum. That's the same thing we did in this platform. We got this 30-kilo clip. It's all tethered on and everything. It's got to be that high in the air. And it's a little dip and a drive. Bam! And that little power, that explosive movement, you still had a hold of the clip, but you didn't have any weight of it. Straight over, zip. The guy goes, "Give it a go, Davey." "Well, where have you been the last 10 years? We go sick when we get this job," he says. So what we did was we just videoed that, and he passed that principle on to the workforce. They went over 22 months without a single incident, and they were hemorrhaging 6 or 7 a month. That's Olympic weightlifting into industry. But the guys could feel it. They want to pass those principles on. So all of a sudden, when you're running manual handling courses, and then instead of people coming in like this, "Heard it all before, mate, can't be bothered, this is boring, I want to get out of here." This is practical. I want it, I can feel it. It's going to make a difference to me. And I think one of the biggest breakthroughs that went through, which people should think about, how do you take the principles home? Because you don't stop lifting just because you stop working. So we do little video clips, little skill bike clips, we call them a good, bad scenario. You know, how to put the shopping in the boot of a car, access and egress, handling the body weight, the dog food, putting the kids in, I almost said the kids in the boot of the car there. No, don't do that. Put the kids in the back seat. You know, but small children in the kiddies' chairs in the back of the car. Then all of a sudden people thinking, hang on, this is about me. And you watch their culture change towards safety. I mean, it's all about having skin in the game. What difference is that going to make to me? I ain't going to get hurt, and I can feel a difference. I'm in. This is great for me. So what we did is we do a version of Train the Trainer, and we call it POPs. Forgive me for this. It's called Passing on the Principal Staff. It's one of the programs we do where we have our own media team. We video the 4 key Olympic principles and show the staff in their working environment how to put the principles into practice, take the pressure off the body. And we train the in-house trainers. So all of a sudden, instead of becoming a trainer which is the almighty, the all-knowing, you become a coach. And then as a coach, you go, hey, there's a new concept now born out of Olympic weightlifting for manual handling. Have a look at this. You show the video, shows the principles, how to go into their department so you can departmentalize it. Let's go and have a look. And then all of a sudden the trainer has got the video with exactly what right and wrong tiny little skill by clip looks like. So there's your measure. And it's all about the sustainability as well. So when you think about it is, do you know the amount of times I've gone in organisations and you've got to wear high visibility waistcoat, going airside or something like that as a prime example, warehouses. Sometimes you put a shirt and tie on, right? and leave the high vis off and walk in there. You last about 0.01 of a second. But guess who challenges you? It ain't the board of directors. It ain't the health and safety team. It ain't the supervisors or managers. It's the workers themselves that the cold face. Excuse me, mate, you need a high vis on here. Why do they do that? They do that because they've got such confidence with the knowledge that they'll be backed up by the management team that this is what you need to do, and I can see it as clear as day. So I will challenge a complete stranger, especially if you've got a shirt and tie on. They say, oi, you need high vis. What are we doing about incorrect lifting? Because that is not the last line of defense. That's a guaranteed injury eventually. The problem was the knowledge. So what we do with this scientifically proved knowledge is we'll show them exactly what correct technique and incorrect technique looks like, but on any smartphone or tablet. So you can actually have it on your hip. So you can pick the phone up and go number 23. There's a 15-second clip and going, excuse me, mate, can you have a look at this? Could you do it like that for me, please? Knowledge is king. Then you couple that with people can physically feel a difference. Oh, what a win-win-win that becomes. And all of a sudden, correct technique is now self-perpetuating. The morale is boosted. How to take the principles home. And people are going, this is great. At all levels. And that's the way you tackle one of the biggest causes of accidents within the industry. Manually, because it's always up there with slips, trips and falls, which I know Christian's going to have a chat with later on about the slips, trips. And then it's about how you sustain it. You know, you can do back to work interviews, but that knowledge, that feeling, what we found is because of the success in lifting and handling, people have come to us and said, what else do you do? Because here's your big thing, right? How do you deliver the message? It's got to be at the end user. And Billy Connolly gave me a great tip. I was watching one of his sketches. If anybody doesn't know who Billy Connolly is, he's one of my most favourite comedians in the world. And I'm watching this clip, and he's doing the one where he said he was driving down the motorway, and he got caught short. He wanted to pull in the services to go to the loo. And he was going through number 2. So he went in there, and the place was heaving. It was full. But there was one cubicle right at the end, which was empty. And he walked in and it was absolutely as clean as a whistle. Oh, this is great, he said. Then he realised why. There was no lock on the back of the door. and he just couldn't reach the door. It kept swinging open. So he said, I had to get me timing right for sitting down and shutting the door to try. And I'm crying with laughter. I'm in absolute tears. Because it happened to me. And I could relate to it. And I'm absolutely all over the place in tears on this floor. And if you can make your safety training relative, wow, now you've got it. And so what we've done is we look at other subjects. And one of the programs we do is we talk about the culture shift, the 12-month campaign. Because I'm a great believer in if you want to change someone's culture or get them to change a habit, you've got to have a drip feed. If you just go, power training, that's it. They'll go best training in the world, mate, cracking. But they will drift. But if you can drip feed it. So what we do over a period of 12 months, for like every month or bi-monthly, we do a little video clip, and it's about culture. And it's all about shortcuts. You see, because if you look at accidents and incidents, one of the things you've got to, hey, Pops coach, Becca, lovely to see you, mate. If you think about accidents and incidents, one of the problems you've got is somewhere, always someone's took a shortcut, right? You have a look at it. And I kind of get it in a way because a lot of our jobs can be repetitive. Per day, per week, you know, same horse, different jockey, slight change here, slight change there. So what we do, we get a little bit overconfident. And because we get overconfident, we'll take a shortcut. but you get away with it. So what do? You take it again. Then you take it again. And then you elongate your shortcut. Then your mate sees you do it. So that's a cracking idea, Davey. I'll do that as well. I've got these time pressures of life, take it off it. Brilliant. What they don't understand is what a lot of people on this webinar do understand is you've got risks out there that a lot of them you can't get rid of. So you've got to manage the risk. So we do risk assessments. We put safe systems of work in place, which reduces down to an acceptable level. Every single time they're taking that shortcut, they're increasing the risk of an injury. We've got it where we call it like a spinning a roulette wheel. And we put the roulette wheel in the video and you land it in the black. So you keep going, keep going. But make no bones about it, sooner or later, you're going to land in that red. And you say to them, here, question. And you can put this on the video to them before you get stuck into the meat of it. And you go, would you spin that roulette wheel for a loved one? Of course you wouldn't. One of your kiddies, grandkiddies, parents, partner, there's no way you'd spin that wheel for them, would you? So how do you think they feel you spinning the wheel for you? Let's have a look at some of these shortcuts and how we're going to stop changing them. And it's little skill bite clips, bang, 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 a bit like an extended TikTok, if you like. And you should see the faces of people. Oh my gosh, I do that. I've done that. You're making it relative. But you're reminding them of the consequences and how we come together as one team to stop taking shortcuts. And you can put it on any subject matter. It is cracking and does not hit the mark. And you've got the video, so new starters can come in, see the video. So it's time set. So what you get is you get the manual handling vehicle, one of the biggest causes. Christian's going to be talking about slip, trips, falls. Sometimes them together is normally 2/3 of accidents everywhere. And then you're changing culture. All of a sudden, you're in a much better place. I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours on this stuff, and I'd love to, but I just wanted to give you a brief sort of share the journey we've been on and give you a little bit of advice on how you can look at training and safety training, make it more memorable, lots of fun, have a bit crack with them. You know, you can have the banter with them, but what a difference it makes if you get the subject matter right and you deliver it to the end user. Carla is a multi-award-winning founder and managing director of Safety Rocks Limited, where she specializes in transforming traditional tick box safety training into engaging experiences that drive culture change. Nice. Looking forward to seeing that. Frustrated by generic industry standards, she's developed innovative. I can never say that word, but you know what it means, don't you? That one. And cross-section training solutions for global organizations ranging from motorsport and defense, healthcare and engineering. Her impact has been recognized with prestigious accolades, including being named 2025 Health and Safety Training MD of the Year by SMN News. Yeah, well done, Carla, mate.
Okay, so I just wanted to pick up from Davey. Davey, thank you so much. I was trying to do my timing to make sure that we actually definitely had the 12 minutes. And Davey, once an Olympian, always an Olympian. So thank you very much. And welcome back after your break, everybody. I just want to try to say, well, trying to give myself a bit of an opportunity to say thank you to the people who have come before. So Davey, for example, bringing all that lovely energy into the room and also talking about things like empowerment, and Louise, all the conversations around defense cognition, and I think they're all really important. And basically the whole entirety of today has been about behaviors, and how, when we're thinking about how we can make 2026 the safest year yet, some of the things that we want to be looking at is also thinking about how we deal with people in the workplace just in general. And Davey has picked up on that. Kristen talked about it at the beginning, and Louise has also talked about it too. And I've thought about different types of things that people have said. So Davey was talking about disconnect. He was also talking about caring and influence and empowerment. And it all leads so nicely on to what we're going to be talking about now. So what I thought we'd talk about today is to talk about how we can look at behavioral polarization within the workplace. So again, when we're thinking about human behavior, incredibly important. So if we made gains in developing, really robust policy in organizations, we feel that we're culturally mature, we still have an issue with the people. Now, people are our most precious asset, but they can also be our biggest problem. So I'm Carla Crocombe. I'm founder and managing director of Safety Rocks Limited, and we have been developing truly tailored training for nearly 11 years now. And we are the partner, the official health and safety training partner for Motorsport UK. And like David said, we work in different industries from aviation to motorsport, basically high risk industries. So what I've got for you today is for us to look at why traditional safety approaches fail with experienced and independent workers. And I want to get you to go away with some tips. So the team have added in a digital takeaway with one of the 7 techniques that's applicable immediately that reduces polarization. And we're going to talk about what polarization actually is. And for us to discover 3 psychological triggers that create genuine behavioral change, and to identify opportunities for impact within our own teams. So let's have a look and see whether or not we can recognize exactly what's possible. So for us, this is really going to be terribly important. So we want to look at what's possible when the right strategies are applied in a systematic way. So first of all, by the end of this session, we'll see a clear path to changing the dynamic of internal behavioral polarization. But before we talk about that, really, what is polarization? If we think about polarization in the workplace, it's this bit where people feel that they are fixed. Individuals, humans, we don't really like to change. And so when we think about polarization in the workplace, it doesn't just divide teams. It quietly increases the level of risk within the organization. And this is especially important when it comes to experienced workers who we know from statistics actually already face a situation where we see higher injury rates. So, for example, in 2023, 2024, 34% of all fatal injuries were those among workers aged 60 and over. Now, why is this important for us? Well, they make up only 11% of the workforce, but when we think about their fixed views, their ways of seeing the world, they are still an important part of the workforce. And as we are all working later, we're all getting older when we're still working, we know that this is an important area of risk that we need to look at. And it can be used for other people as well, these techniques to behaviorally modify people. And this becomes incredibly important. We know that experience can, in essence, breed a level of confidence. And we see that in ourselves. But sometimes confidence exacerbates polarization and increases the level of risk. So we know that the risk is amplified amongst people who are self-employed, and these hidden cultural divides ultimately feed into the UK's annual cost of work-related ill health and workplace injuries, which is sitting at around £22 billion. So experienced workers who are incredibly important to us in the workplace actually contribute significantly to this burden. So for us, we want tools. I always say to people, when we move away from the sessions that we do, whatever we do, we want to give people tools. Now, why is this important? If you think about the sectors that we work in, and you look at some of the highest risk industries that we see. So some examples that are on the screen, so pharmaceuticals and healthcare. If you look at the burnout risk associated with them, there's some real issues around stress and burnout rates in the UK, and these link with behaviours. So if you think about some of the issues around people's behaviours, we as humans do not like to change. And as I said, it links in with what Louise was talking about first thing, and exactly what Davey was talking about too. So all of these things like language, how we modify people's behavior, the risk appetite, the sustainability in the future of both organizations, but also everything else we do within the country. So for us, those risks are really important. So some different amounts of statistics here, looking at motorsport, 70% of motorsport personnel report burnout symptoms. And when we think about behaviors, they feed into those risks. And if you look at the data around these issues, they are really important issues in the workplace. So when I first started out in safety 20 odd years ago, actually the majority of the work that we did was safety. So we were health and safety people, but mainly we did safety. When you now look at the hazards that are creating the most risk within organizations and also the most working time lost, it all focuses around health. And so these are important things to consider, and also the well-being of our staff. So health and well-being become incredibly important. And there are some aggravating factors that we look at with longer work days. So, for example, in the logistics and transport sector, it has incredibly long work days with an average of 9 hours and 10 minutes, which is 26 minutes longer than across industry average. Now, we can learn some things between by looking at those cross-sector analytics. We can learn lots of things. So leaders have to manage workloads in high pressure environments, and this can contribute to their own risk. It can contribute to other people's risk. So managing culture, polarization, and burnout becomes incredibly important. So that is really important for us to understand how we do that. And as I said, if we've got great systems in place and the board are on board, as it were, with reference to understanding risk appetite, and everybody knows what they're doing, and there are gold-plated policies and procedures in place, we still have the issue of dealing with people. And we can't always look inside the mind of everybody when we're thinking about risk on a day-to-day basis. So we need to start understanding ourselves, and we need to start understanding the people who work for us. It's a big issue for us globally. The fact is, in high-risk sectors, managing human behavior is an incredibly important thing. Now, as Louise said, over the years, we've seen so many different things, and sometimes we go away from our careers and we reflect on what we've seen. And I have trained thousands of people over the years, and I have had interesting conversations with people. I've seen the responses from people, and I kind of look and think, well, what is it about human behavior that people don't get? And these are the key recognition points, or this problem recognition framework, which we've created to identify why our current approaches to managing human behavior within organizations often fail. So we want to agitate the issue and think about when we see those aha moments. So one of the key ones is we genuinely think people care as leaders and managers about what we've got to say. So I'm a manager in a business, I say you do this, you do that. Oh, by the way, I don't want you working all those extra hours. I want you to do this, 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 and this, but you're not with them. So in certain sectors where people are remote, and even post-COVID, where we still see quite a substantial amount of remote working, we believe we say something and we believe people care. And that is a misjudgment. People don't care about what we've got to say. So we need to find out what they do care about. So by the end of this session, what I want to try and do is give you a tool to improve human behavior. And it's one of many tools. It's one of 7 tools that we can use. We also believe that people understand what we say. Now, a long time training, many opportunities for me to interact with people and see how they approach practical exams and all of these kind of different things. And I remember back in the early days of training when I was delivering some low-level NEBOSH training in terms of the qualification levels. And I would have had 20 people, say, in a room. And I get back the practicals from these 20 people, and every single one of them is different. Now, initially, I'd be like, what are people doing in the room? What's going on? Were they even in the same room as me? I remember saying it out loud. Were they even in the same room as me? And then I realized that it's not their fault, it's mine. And so one of those things about communication within organizations is that we have to understand that we cannot instantaneously believe that people understand what we say. And for many different reasons, but we can talk about this, and we can talk about it all day, really, about people not understanding what what we say. We also believe sometimes wrongly that people will behave like adults. In the workplace, people, they're grown up, they'll behave like adults. And we assume that that's going to be the case, but that is far from the case. And we believe that people will think like us. So I remember being 19, thinking the whole world thought the same way as me. And genuinely, that is not the case. And we also believe that people inherently trust us. Now, for you, you may be somebody who trusts people until they lose that trust from you, but a lot of people don't. So these are some of the issues that we see when we think about the problems that we face. And this is why everything we've tried with people hasn't worked. So we think about the why, the who, the how, and all of these kind of bits and pieces, but we also need to understand people's personal motivations. So it's a really interesting point when we think about human behavior, because we want people to be onboarded. We want people to understand our culture. We spend time creating governance strategies, linking to what Louise was talking about earlier. We spend time trying to train people. Think about all the energy and enthusiasm that Davey brings to the training when he's thinking about manual handling. We do this, and then sometimes we miss the mark and we don't understand why. So for us, it's linking in to everything that we've done so far within the round table. So the other thing we have to consider is that when we're thinking about behavioral polarization, people being fixed at a point, we have to understand how human beings actually are. So if we have a perceived freedom, even if it's not real, but we perceive it's a freedom. So for me, I perceive that I can drive wherever I want to drive, however fast I want to drive, for example. That is a perception. It's not reality, but it's a perception. If I perceive that freedom is being threatened, psychologically, as a human, I will react. Now, some of you will remember being a teenager and thinking about your parents saying, right, Carla, you must be back at 10 o'clock. You need to be home by 10 o'clock, etc., etc. And that reactance, so that's a threat to my perceived freedom, will mean I will behave in a way that will do whatever I can to restore that level of freedom. So if we think about polarization, we can easily become polarized when we perceive that our freedom is being threatened. And we will try anything we can as individuals to restore that freedom. And it's interesting when we look at how this gets delivered. So we spend a lot of time running behavioral modification programs and health and safety training in general, and writing tailored programs for organization about tweaks to behavioral change, tweaks to modifying the individual's behaviors within the organization. And you see this by passive aggressive nature of people. They will say, oh, you know what, I had a trainer yesterday and they were rubbish. And you're be like, why? Why were they rubbish? Because they didn't actually curtail to their way of seeing the world, and people have a particular way of seeing the world, and the older that we get, the more polarized we become, the more our attitudes are difficult, they're entrenched and more difficult to change. So we need to find how we deal with this, because if I say, because I said so, as a leader or a manager, that can create more polarization because of the theory of reactance. And it's a really interesting thing when people are independently minded, how we look at this and how we try to move this forward. So sometimes we talk about competence, and in safety, we talk about competence a lot, but also sometimes familiarity, and that competence or that perceived competence can become the enemy of safety and the enemy of risk management. So growing experience can weirdly and ironically lead to a level of decreased safety awareness and increased risk-taking behaviors, as well as polarization. So for us, we think, oh, you know what, we've got lots of these people in the workplace. They can show the new people coming in. They're the ones who know the systems and all the rest of it. But they may have shortcuts, and they may have developed these entrenched shortcuts that actually increase the level of risk that you don't even know about. So our behaviors within the organization is going to be really important. We also know there is a really different mindset between generations that's actually not existed in the way it exists before. And that's from the development of technology, also the development of the way people perceive the world. There is a huge divide in the way generations think about work, they think about safety, and they think about risk. And there's a lack of understanding between people who are over 60 to people who are under 20. Like there's such a difference. And so when we think about we think about experience, sometimes we think, oh, you know what, that person is experienced. But you think about it in yourself. If you think about yourself, what do you do now that's more risky than you did when you were younger? Or do you do something slightly different? And do you actually see any or recognize any of these patterns in your team? So, who recognizes any patterns like this in their team? So it's really interesting how to think about what we need to do. And we want to give you solutions. We want to give you tools to be able to talk to your staff, join them together, think about change, what this actually looks like, what that actually looks like to improve risk management within an organization. So first of all, we want to think about what is the breakthrough. So what actually drives true behavioral change? First of all, we have to understand that people don't like change. So if we shift the focus from internal motivation to the environment, so if we think about Vroom's theory of motivation, if we tell people how, why, what, where, and when, etc., unless they're personally motivated to change, you've got hell or no chance. Our aha moment is the realization that willpower and motivation are unreliable, as are humans. And I spend so much of my time saying humans are inherently prone to failure. And instead of us trying to be more disciplined, if you think about giving up smoking or going on a diet, the breakthrough insight for us, and this is really useful in organizations in terms of culture, and this again fits into what Louise was talking about and what Davey's talking about, is to design the environment to make the desired behavior the natural path of least resistance. Less resistance, less polarization. Because people are reactive and they will step up to secure and challenge anyone who tries to take away their perceived freedoms. So if we've got an environment that makes the desired behavior the natural path of least resistance, if you think about human beings, we like the path of least resistance, it becomes natural and it becomes less polarized. So we want to make sure that we think about safe place before safe people. And that fits with all the things that we know traditionally in occupational health and safety, but it is a breakthrough because it tells us to make sure that we always remember the thing about people don't care, people are selfish, people are self-focused, and that's a natural cognitive thing. It's not always focused on the now. It's subconscious. It's not something, Louise was talking about defense cognition. It's something that happens naturally in humans. So if we have less resistance, we can achieve less polarization, which means that there's less separation between that generation and everybody singing from the same hymn sheet, which is what we want in an organization. Last year I did a course on behavioral modification with some groups of people over in New Zealand and Australia. And we were talking about data. And they were saying, that Generation Z has an attention span of around 20 seconds. So when we're thinking about dealing with people, we need to think about how they perceive what we're trying to say to them and how they will process the information that we're giving them. So instead of trying to be more disciplined, the breakthrough insight is to design the environment. So think about safe place. How can we make everything the path, the natural path to least resistance? It's really important. Now, if we think about those psychological triggers that create human change, first of all, we have to think about the why. So motivation is a really important part of this. So if you think about motivation in general, what is your why? So the best way for us to be thinking about it is what's important to you. And I spend so much time talking to people about this. I remember when I first started working and I worked with my parents for a while, and my dad would always say to me, know thy stuff. Understand them, understand what motivates people. So if something motivates you, maybe it's time off, maybe it's money, maybe it's a bit of sunshine. Is that the same for other people? And the answer to that is always going to be no. Everybody has something different that motivates them. So finding their why is a really important thing to understand. Also, if you give people capability and ability to do something, that is going to enable them to feel confident. This bolsters, this bit about Davey said the word empowerment. Davey, I wrote that down, the word empowerment, because it's a really important one that we use, and it's a completely applicable here. So I know that over the years I've trained people, I've gone off to do maybe risk assessment training with people. I've developed all this lovely course, and I get on the course and somebody says, oh, yes, I've worked in the organization for like 44 years, but nobody's ever asked me or nobody's ever shown me how to do risk assessment properly. And that person may be upset, they may be stressed. But if you want somebody to change, you need to give them the capability and ability to be able to do that. And it's a really important thing, give people the tools, give people the motivation, find it, link it all together. The importance of human behavior is so, it cannot be underestimated. If we think about the unsafe acts and unsafe conditions and the immediate causes of accidents, we still see that 90% or around about 90% of all incidents occur because of some unsafe act. And if this is the case, if we've got gold-plated systems and we've got this and we've got that and we've got, governance structures and we've got all of these kind of things, but the people don't have what they need to be able to do the job they're paid to do, that is a real problem. So it is rarely wasted. Time spent on building capability and ability to be able to do things is incredibly important. Same for this week. I've been out at a customer, and I go in. I've got 20 people in the training, and I ask them. So they're asking you to do incident investigation. Okay, do you know how to do that? I asked them, do you know how to do that? Have you ever been trained how to do that? And they go, no. So how do you know how to do incident investigation? Well, we don't, we guess. Oh, well, it's common sense, isn't it? I love that. It's common sense, isn't it, how to do an incident investigation? And I'm like, you're not giving people the tools. And the other thing that we need to do is make sure that we give them the opportunity. So again, there's no point in going into an organization and saying, right, I'm going to go and train you in tailored risk assessment training, and then we don't give them the opportunity to be able to use that skill. So you use it or lose it. We all know that if you're riding a bike or riding a horse, you learn something, and then all of a sudden, if you don't use it, you often lose that skill. So where is the when and where is the opportunity to incite that behavioral change? So there's just some triggers that we can use, and also a system that we can use. And we ask ourselves, do we have those three things in place that, the magic treble, the MCOs, do we have them in place to be able to incite change? Again, it's incredibly important that when we're thinking about management of change within organization, that we provide this pathway. So one of the things I really wanted to do was give you some tools. So if I think about the 7 kind of tools that I've got for changing and transforming safety culture by focusing on human behavior, I'll give you one complete technique. And this is a peer credibility conversation framework. And we call this the CBIC model. And some of you may have seen this before, but it can have dramatic results, and it's included in your digital goodie bag. So how do we use this in practice? What does this actually look like? If we're thinking about how we converse with people and when you want something done, if you say, I told you so, is that going to work? Now we know all of those things about human behavior, the reactance model. And these are tools that you can go away and use straight away within your organization. The days of you will do it, you're afraid of me, get it sorted are done, and doesn't work when it comes to risk. And even if people are not able to communicate managing risk in the same way that we would at this level, it doesn't matter. They understand it, even if they can't communicate it in the way that we would. So we need to work with people. So if we want something to change, the first thing is what we would do with them is we would look at the situation and we would describe to them the situation that we see. So, hey, Alex, can I talk to you for a moment? This morning around 10:30, I noticed something when you were in the yard at the east side of the building. So you set the situation, you set the scene. Then you talk about the behavior. No, we think that we understand behavior. What we really want to do is understand what preceded the behavior, but we don't always get the opportunity to see the antecedent. So we don't always get the opportunity to see what precedes a behavior. We would like to know, we would want to know, but we don't always know what that is. And if we want to incite true change, understanding the antecedent becomes really important too. But we put here, I saw you climb the ladder to reach the back of the transporter and you didn't have your safety harness clipped on. So very simple. I've described to that person their behavior. There's no angst. There's no emotion here. There's no aggression. We're just being lovely and calm. And then you're describing impact. Now, again, I've ringed this. The impact becomes important. So again, Davey, he said it. The reason why we do multiple programs over a period of time and we work with people is you could go in and deliver a fantastic training course, but how do you keep the momentum going? So impact becomes really important. And this is the bit that becomes emotional. So we know that people will change more if we can find their motivation. Not being seriously injured or killed is a motivation. So I don't go to work on a day-to-day basis to be seriously injured or killed. I'd like to keep my bits, my mental sanity, and I'd like to be alive. And everybody else usually would too, unless they're suffering in some other way. But we explain to somebody about the impact and the behavior. And we think about how they are going to think, and we also think about the emotion surrounded by that. So I felt concerned when I saw you, basically, when I saw that because of a fall from height, it could cause a serious injury. What was going through your mind? Was there a reason that you weren't clipped on? I felt concerned when I saw that could happen. And then what you want to be able to do is then work together. So if you work in isolation, actually you are not collaborating. And if you think about the model for improving culture, collaboration is part of that. So getting people's buy-in becomes incredibly important. So for everybody's safety, including yours, we really need to make sure that everyone is clipped on 100% of the time up there. Can I count on you to do that? So at that point, you're asking for assurance that that's going to happen. And if you see an issue with the equipment again, let's fix it right away together before you start the task. Now, this is not going to work in every situation, and there are other tools that we can use as well. But the word influence comes into the equation. And again, I have written that down. I have talked about how we can modify behavior, but the word influence becomes incredibly important. I think that we can know everything when it comes to safety. We can know all of the technicalities and we could be encyclopedic. And sometimes for some of us, that is something that we are. But unless you have the ability to charm and influence as a manager or a leader, you're going to find it really difficult to incite any kind of change because change is painful for human beings. On average, it takes hundreds often of days for people to change, just one thing. So people don't like change. So if we work with people, collaborate with people, and provide things like social proof and reduced psychological defense, that defense mechanism in them, Louise was talking about it earlier. People go on the defensive, and we want to stop that. If you go around saying, "Oi, sort that out. You're doing something unsafe. Oi, sort it out." It just doesn't work. We know it doesn't work because we see the responses. You turn around and somebody's moaning about you behind your back. So it becomes really important. So in terms of the vision casting that we want to kind of incite and the clear road ahead, we know that there are full techniques that include step-by-step techniques to transform human behavior. I mentioned the bit about the antecedent, so understanding what that looks like in terms of modifying behavior. So what precedes the behavior becomes really important in terms of safety culture, and also is important when it comes to polarization, especially of demographics of staff within the organization, grouping together and being polarized one opinion. Thinking about people saying, oh, you know what, the managers around here, you're only in doing safety training because they just want to cover themselves. And what creates that polarization? Really understanding, asking the questions to people, but as well as asking the questions, also creating a situation where you can follow up and make that effective change. And there are 6 additional techniques that we can use to transform safety culture. And companies that have implemented similar techniques, whilst they have everything else in place, governance structures, policies and procedures, systems, maybe they have an ISO standard, and they're still seeing really silly incidents occurring, and people are doing root cause analysis and saying that person was a bit of an idiot that day and all the rest of it badly. They're doing root cause analysis badly if that's the case. But if we want to dramatically cut incidents and increase performance, then we want to be able to implement some of these tools. We know, and I'll refer back to that statistic of unsafe acts cause around 90% of incidents. So if that is the case, that we know that we need to spend time and energy and our money on making sure that humans behave in the way that we want them to within the workplace. So if you look here, there's a note on here saying about Pfizer Grange Castle, who reported a 1,600% increase in positive safety interventions over a three-year period. Some of the organizations we work with call them points of engagement. You're having a conversation, you're having a safety conversation with a colleague, and you can use all of these techniques and tools to transform behavior. And okay, change doesn't happen overnight, it's slow, but with major improvements in ownership and also hazard identification and leadership engagement, alongside cultural accountability and decreased polarization, most organizations and the leaders within them will see measurable change within the first 30 days if they use all of the 7 techniques. So today, you've just would have learned one of those 7 techniques for behavioral change and to reduce polarization. So remember, change is fundamentally possible. I think that's really important to remember too. So change is definitely possible. Now, what we have done is we have included a lovely digital takeaway. Oh, Christian, I've put your lovely face on the screen there too, because Christian is coming up soon. So I'm going to introduce Christian Harris, but before I do that, I'm just going to say that we have, and I've done quite well. I've given Christian plenty of time. We've got plenty of time for our round table. We've included the solution preview as a digital takeaway for you in the pack. So I want to introduce the lovely Christian Harris. He is the founder and CEO of Slip Safety Services, and he is a leading UK authority on preventing slip-related accidents with over a decade of experience in risk management. Through his organization, Safety and Risk Success, and his podcast, he has helped global leaders in sectors like hospitality and healthcare reduce incidents and lower insurance costs. Well done, Christian. I've known Christian for a long time now. He's very, very good indeed. And he's a data-driven advocate for transparency, and his mission is to redefine safety performance and make the world a safer, one floor at a time. I'm loving that. Now, I'm hoping you'll all make 2026 your safest year yet. So I've been Carla Crocombe, and I'm the founder and managing director of Safety Rocks, and we've been rocking safety since 2015. Over to you, Christian.
Thank you, Carla. I don't know if anybody's got any quick questions for Carla, because we are running well within our time limit. So if anybody does have a question and they want to be brave and raise their hand, then we'd be very happy to have you come and talk. Let's see if there's anything in the chat.
I am going to, I've just stopped sharing so that we can take any questions. I'll have a look in the chat as well. I've been trying to Look at that. Look at some of the chat as we've been going along. Absolutely brilliant. What I was also trying to do was to link in with everybody else. And I know, Christian, you'll do exactly the same. There is definitely a theme about today. And that behavioral, human behavior part is incredibly important. Somebody's put about what about accountability as a trigger? It would be interesting if you describe more about what you mean by that in terms of accountability, in terms of a trigger. And in terms of so did that not work? Could you not see the slides very well?
We could see the slides. It was a little bit, yeah, I think maybe it was in, I don't know, speaker mode or something. But yeah, we could see the slides.
Okay, we will, by the way, also we will send them to you as well, so you've got a copy of the slides. So you could do like Louise said earlier, if you message me on LinkedIn and you put in their behavior in the chat, I'll send them over to you as well. So that's absolutely fine too.
Good stuff. Yeah, Louise, go ahead.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your both the presentations. What an amazing set of webinars we're having. I just wanted to pick up, and it might actually answer the question about accountability as a trigger. So one of the things that you said in your presentation, Carla, was, we can have all the governance in the world, but actually we still need behaviors. I'd kind of challenge that a little to say, in order for organizations, and what you do is incredible and important, and it's all about modern safety leadership practice, but that takes a direction shift of organizations, and it's, I'd almost say that's probably a board level, we're going to do things differently. And so that really comes back down to that, if we don't have a strategic mandate to approach things in an organizational wide manner, we kind of miss the trick. We become siloed as safety professionals, and that's when I see, safety as being a technical issue, rather than a strategic issue which is embedded across the organization.
It's an interesting one. So I can use an example from this week. So I have gone into an organization that has got some of the best governance structures that I've ever seen. So they've got they've got a risk working group, they've got a strategic leadership risk group, that the structure is there. So structurally, their governance is spot on. But when you speak to the people on the ground, they don't understand the governance structures for starters. So they don't get what's this forum for? What does that actually do? What's my role in that? So that there's the disconnect about communication. And this is what we're saying about all of these techniques and tools are about communication. If we think about the 4 C's, Louise, control, communication, competency, cooperation, all of those things. When I say you can have the best governance structures in the world, what I actually mean is structure. So you can have gold-plated structures, and somebody's put about the accountability bit. The senior management team are accountable. We've been at a social housing organization, and there's a new social housing act which says, the CEO is the safety leader, etc., etc. When you look at those people, they're great. They've got the governance structures and all the rest of it, but there is a huge disconnect between that and the conversations that they have with people. It's almost like they don't know how to have the conversations with people. And so the toolkit, the 7 steps to behavioral modification, is almost designed for the people who don't know how to have those conversations. And we expect people will have charm and influence, but my goodness, what the safety profession is like, Louise. There are the good ones and the people that are good at charm and influence, and there are the really bad ones.
Yeah, and I would challenge that's a good governance structure.
Yes.
Because you may have a structure, and I've been into organizations that have great structures, but the governance, it's not about structure, it's about what goes, modern governance should be fluid, and it's, we're moving into a new world of governance now where it's, in the past it's been company secretariat, am I ticking the right boxes to have the right discussions, but actually we're moving on from that. And so I would challenge that those organisations have good governance structures, because actually, you know, and it goes back to my comments about the choice chain. So or leaders need to make choices that are quite hard to make because it involves change, which comes back to everything that you're saying.
So we have so many conversations about risk appetite. So I was at Manchester recently and we talked about risk appetite. And when you talk to leaders about the conversation, or when you talk to leaders about appetite for the level of risk, they push it onto safety professionals and they will say to us, you know, you're the safety professional. You know, what does that mean? You know, what does appetite got to do with us? Well, I'm sorry, you're the people who decide what risk you're willing to take in order to be able to create the commercial activity that you're getting paid to do. And obviously, you're the ones who make those final decisions around the account, you know, who are accountable for those decisions. So you have to, as a senior management team, decide how much appetite you're willing to take in order for commercial gain. But the problem is often that's pushed onto the safety professionals to make those decisions because the board and senior leadership team don't understand that they are responsible for making those decisions. You can take as much risk as you like, but you decide it, you write it down, and you tell your team, right? So that everybody else knows how much risk you're willing to take. It's not for the safety professionals to do that, but you have to communicate it. And the thing is, with some of the conversations that we have with people, that those they just don't have the right conversations. So we get people who will go, I have no idea what the senior leadership team want from us. We're so disconnected from the board. We don't really understand. So we'll just do what we like. And that's where polarization comes in.
It's
because
misaligned. So that's when the governance structure becomes misaligned. And the other point that I'm always looking at how do we get the leadership right? So ERM did some research a while ago where they, and I need to get the reference for this, where they interviewed a wide range of safety professionals in big organizations. And the number one issue that came up again and again was the capacity, so the cognitive overload and the capability of leadership teams. And so this lends itself back to the language that we use to help and support them in the task that they've got, because they don't understand it, and so it gets simplified.
And also that capability and the cognitive ability and that then proliferates throughout the whole organization.
100%.
Because language, I wrote language. I'm laughing at myself because I scribbled down on pieces of paper what you wrote, what Davey wrote today. But language is incredibly important. If you're talking to a board about risk and they don't understand what risk is in the first place, I will genuinely guarantee 90% of the time I have conversations with board members who don't know what risk actually is. And so if that's the case, how can you then communicate that to anybody else? How does anybody know how much risk you're willing to take? So that bit about human connection and those skills, you know, you're saying earlier, they're not soft. They are not soft. They are the things that make us good. They are power. They are like your superpower, like Louise Hoskins' superpower, charm and influence. It is so true, because if we can communicate and make and simplify these things so people can understand them at all levels and everybody works together, that's when we see huge, substantial cultural changes. And some of those things can happen really quickly if we teach people how to talk to people. So, Louise, it's brilliant. It's brilliant. I love it. I love it.
And I could talk all day, so you better interrupt.
Yeah, quick, Christian, stop us talking.
I'll dive in. We can resume our discussion in the panel in a minute. So thank you so much, Carla. That was great. And yeah, 3 great speakers so far. Apologies for what's about to come, but I will do my very best, everybody. So I'm going to bring us into some areas that are going to overlap with what's been said already in many ways, but also thinking really about some practical stuff in terms of, in my experience, you know, if you want to build that great safety culture and you want people to feel psychologically safe, etc., they need to feel physically safe as well. And as I'll share, the data shows that the biggest cause of accidents, injuries, and claims is people slipping. And my firm belief and what I've seen is that if we can solve this problem, it really does help to support all the other great things that we're trying to do as a profession. So just to start with, I'll quickly, in case you haven't come across me before, I'll quickly give you my very brief backstory in terms of why I am really passionate about safety. And someone on this call, Clive, may remember this. So if you cast your mind back to, he wasn't involved personally, I hasten to add, because when I tell you the story, I don't want you to think that Clive was the person involved in this. But if you cast your mind back to 2012, just before the London Olympics, I live in London, still do to this day. This was a time before kids and marriage. So my wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, and I went for a lovely trip to this place called Columbia Road Flower Market. Got some flowers, had some lunch, had a lovely walk along the canal in the sun. Started heading home, drove our car back to Sainsbury's supermarket in Islington in North London. Parked up the car, started walking to the store, and I was walking pretty much where this chap here in the blue jumper can be seen on screen. And then that's the last thing I remember for several hours. That was me that day, and you can see it's from many moons ago by the color of my hair. Um, Although I've still got my hair, so I'm doing quite well in many ways. But what happened was a car was going too fast, sped around that corner, lost control, veered from side to side, mounted the curb, and ran me over. And you can see there a bandage on my collarbone. I've still got a plate in my collarbone. Broke my left wrist, broke my left ankle because it came at me from the left. So when something like that happens to you, it's fair to say you get quite passionate about safety. So I was interested in safety before that, obviously, but that's what really gave me a passion that I hold to this very day. So let's talk about slips, and I'll explain in a minute why I focus in on slips. And I'm going to try and give you some thought-provoking ideas, things you can look out for that might enable you to see why this is a big problem still. So this image is of a bridge, and it's in China, and it's designed, this bridge, to connect China with another country. I can't remember which country it is. But as you can see, it's kind of jutting out into the middle of this harbour, and a huge amount of time, effort, and money has been spent on creating this bridge. Excuse me. But as you can clearly see, it's not finished. So actually, it doesn't really serve any purpose until we do the whole job. And I'm going to use lots of analogies today. And the analogy here, I'm going to liken in to slips and how we deal with them by showing you this return on effort curve. So this isn't my design. This is something that is used in lots of different settings. But what this shows is that if you do the basics on any given task, in other words, you put in low effort, then you're going to get a modest result. Whereas if you put in a small amount of extra effort, you can get a high return and get into a sort of high performance state. And a bit like the bridge, what I've seen over the years is that most organizations, when it comes to managing the risk of slips, are down in this kind of doing the basics area. So we've done a lot of the work, but we haven't quite finished that bridge. We're not quite doing enough to move into the high performance area. And actually, once you've built most of the bridge, finishing it off isn't that much extra time, effort, cost, etc. But it's absolutely possible to have very significant reductions in slip risk and slip incidents and slip claims by putting in a very small amount of extra effort and getting into this high performance area. There's data to support this. This is the HSE RIDDOR data. What can you see here? Firstly, slips, trips, and falls is the biggest category. Secondly, it's very, very flat. That suggests that we're doing something, because if we weren't doing something, if we weren't doing the basics, then it would be a much bigger proportion. But also that we're not really going anywhere. We're sort of moving sideways, a bit like a crab. And to my mind, that's not good enough. We should be doing more. So why do I specialize in slips? Well, I saw this issue and then I saw a couple of other things that I'll tell you about, and hopefully you'll start to see why. So a bit more data for you. 2018, AXA UK, a large insurance company you've probably heard of, spent £80 million on slip claims. That compared to £30 million for manual handling, like Davey was talking about, and then trip claims were on top. Now, AXA is a very big insurer, but they don't have even 5% of the UK market. So if they did have 5%, 80 million extrapolated with a 5% is 1.6 billion of slip claims in 2018. Okay, so that gives you a point in time. What's happened since then? Well, in terms of incidents, it's been pretty flat. If anything, maybe a small increase. But let's think about the world, particularly since 2020 and COVID, and then going into the cost of living crisis driven in part by COVID, in part by the war in Ukraine. Costs have been going up and up and up and up. Everybody knows that. Everybody's feeling that. So this is a problem that was a 1.6 to 2 billion pound problem, at least in 2018. The problem in terms of the size hasn't changed. If anything, it's increased a little bit, but the cost of that problem has been increasing significantly. So we have a massive, massive problem here, and a problem in my view that therefore is worth solving. And if we think about doing the basics, who would be doing the basics pretty well? A big organization like Tesco. Even Tesco here had a £733,000 fine after someone slipped and broke their hip. So if Tesco's are doing the basics, which I'm sure they are, and that isn't good enough for them, that suggests it's probably not good enough for anyone else either. But I mentioned that it is possible to do better. So here's a few examples. So across different sectors here, you can see that it is more than achievable to halve at least the number of incidents that you're having. A couple of particular examples I want to highlight. So one of the things I hear a lot is, well, we're bound to have slips because we've got such high footfall. Euston Station is one of the busiest buildings in the country. We worked with Network Rail. They tracked the data. They actually published this in an industry magazine. And for a 4-month period, current year versus the year before, after we'd done the recommended interventions, they saw 60% fewer reported incidents. Another one we hear a lot is, well, the floor's wet. If it's wet, it's bound to be slippery. There's nothing we can do. We worked with a leisure club operator who had 150 sites. They were getting one slip insurance claim per week. And over a few months, we managed to support them to drive that down to one per month. So that alone is a several £100,000 saving just on the claims cost, but there were all sorts of other benefits that they got as well. So it's absolutely possible. A few things that you could look out for and bear in mind. These are the sorts of things, the mistakes that I see that keep this problem going flat, like it suggested that it was. First example is a photograph. This is CCTV footage. I'm not going to show you the video as you'll understand why. I asked people to look at this image and tell me what's wrong. Some people say this lady's going to do her back because she's stretching, but it's actually nothing to do with her. It's all about the yellow sign and the puddle. What most people say is perhaps the yellow sign could be further towards the middle of the aisle, but most people don't see much fundamentally wrong with this issue, with this situation, because yeah, the floor's wet, but there's a sign, so it's okay. There's a sign. What actually happened here is that the feet at the top of the screen belong to a man called Stanley May. He's going to walk down the aisle. He's going to slip in that water and bang the back of his head. And then about 48 hours later, he passes away. So this incident led to the co-op having a criminal investigation. They were fined by Cornwall Council. And Cornwall Council said this, which kind of encapsulates the challenge, the first mistake that I see often. Signage alone is not an adequate control. Proactive measures must be taken to either prevent floors becoming slippery or precluding public access. So the first thing to look out for as a symptom of a bigger problem, I guess, is that we're relying on signs as a solution. These yellow signs don't have anti-gravitational properties. And And actually, in many cases, they don't protect you in the way that you think they might do. There absolutely are two times that you should or you must use wet floor signs. One is when you're cleaning the floor in a proactive way because you're making that floor wet and therefore increasing the risk by making it wet. And the other time is when you're dealing with a spillage. If you spot a spillage, a temporary hazard, you absolutely should get a sign, warn people, dry that spillage, clean the floor, make sure the floor's dry, and then take that sign away. If you're seeing signs left out other than during those two times, or in other words, they're left out, when it's wet outside, for example, that's a symptom to suggest that you're not dealing with slip risk well, because you shouldn't really need to have a sign out. Second mistake I see, this guy probably that's probably what I look like nowadays. I used to be quite into lifting weights, but those were many days, many moons ago. Unlike Davey, who's done well and kept it up. I like this photo because it shows something around the difference between an activity and an outcome. And you can go to the gym. I'm sure Davey would support this. You can go to the gym and lift weights again and again and again and again and again and again. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get bigger, more muscular, or stronger. Because if you're using the wrong technique, you're not going to achieve the outcome that the activity you're doing is designed to achieve. And that's analogous to cleaning in the world of slips. So what most people think is, well, we keep our floors clean, and therefore we're minimizing slip risk. But how clean actually are your floors? This is a floor in a shopping centre in Manchester. Looks pretty clean until you clean a patch and you realise, oh, actually, the floors aren't that clean. So just because we're doing the activity of cleaning doesn't necessarily mean we're achieving the outcome of clean, and the difference in slip risk between clean and not clean can be hugely significant. Third example I want to use is this bald tire. So you buy your brand new tires and they're perfect, but if you just run your tires again and again and again and again, and you don't check them at some point in time, they're going to become bald, and therefore they're going to be A, illegal, and B, very, very unsafe. And this is relevant to slips because what we see a lot is people who start with a floor that is slip resistant or anti-slip, whichever phrase you want to use. But they then assume that means that it's going to stay that way forever. And as we all know, things change. So a couple of photos here. On the left is a spice blending facility. I actually took this photo. I walked in there and I was doing a slip risk assessment, and I looked at the floor and I thought, well, at least they've got a good floor because it looks like it should be a good textured resin anti-slip floor. But actually, upon closer inspection, under the racking, the shelving there, and by the skirting boards, the floor is rough like sandpaper. But in the main walkways, it's worn smooth over the years of footfall. So it's a floor that looks like it's anti-slip, but actually it's very slippery. And then an example here, another cleaning example, I guess. This is in a leisure centre. The perception here was, well, we've got anti-slip floors, and they did, but the problem was the slip resistance of the floor was only effective when the floor was clean, like that patch. When it was dirty, like the rest of the tiles, all the dirt had sort of clogged up the pores, and therefore the floor was very slippery. So we can't assume just by looking at a floor that we know it's safe. Now, Carla and Louise, you'll have to fight out over this £500 umbrella. I personally wouldn't carry this one around myself, partly because I'm prone to losing umbrellas as much as anything. But an umbrella is great when it rains, right? But the issue with an umbrella is if you forget it, then it's not going to do much to look after you. And one thing we see a lot with slips, and I'm sure this is the same in manual handling as well, Davey, is, oh, it's okay, the insurance will cover us. So it doesn't matter if someone slips and they hurt themselves because, the insurance company will pay. Firstly, just like with your home insurance or your car insurance, there's often an excess. There's also something called an aggregate, where once you've had a certain number of claims, you start to pay all of the claims anyway. But the real kickers here are that next year's premium, if you have claims this year, it's going to push your premium up. So yes, you might not be paying for that issue there and then, but you will be paying for it in the future. And of course, there's all the uninsured costs that HSE talk about in the cost iceberg as well. And then the fifth thing I see a lot. Now, look, I'm not going to run a poll here, but I suspect that nobody would eat the bread on the left. Some people might be willing to eat the chicken on the right. And the problem here is that actually the risk on the chicken, you can't see it, but it could be riddled with bacteria. The risk on the bread is obviously clear to see. And this aligns with another problem that I see, which is that people bundle together slips and trips. Even the HC does this. Yeah, we talk about slips, trips, and falls on the same level. Slips, trips, and falls are not the same thing. Trips is a bit like the moldy bread. You can see a trip hazard. You can feel a trip hazard. Slips, as I'll talk about in a minute, it's a bit more like the chicken. The hazard isn't necessarily so visible. It doesn't sort of slap you around the face in terms of being obvious. It can do sometimes, clearly, but not always. So it's important that we don't deal with slips and trips in the same thing. We need to split them out, and they need different actions. Just to illustrate the point, if we look here in the manufacturing sector, as a proportion of all insurance claims, trips is only 3%, but slips is 38%. And in retail, trips is 8% of claims, slips is 20%. Hospitality and leisure, slips is a third of claims, trips only 7%. So slips is a much, much bigger chunk of cost of issue per the AXA data, per this data, but it's also much more complicated. Quickly on trips, just so you've got a view as to what you can do about it. Here's a mnemonic for you. Trip, tidy, which is all about removing the temporary trip hazards, so trailing cables, items left in walkways and things like that. Things that you can move them out of the way, and that obviously gets rid of that risk. Route is all about, where possible, having predefined walkways, so people are going in a particular area, and then you can focus your effort on making those areas safe enough. Identify is about raising awareness, so people understand what they're looking for. One of the things we've done, for example, with the NHS is we've done sort of shopping trolley coins, and they use those to go around and see whether a lip is kind of big enough to warrant action immediately, or whether it should be one that should be monitored over time. And then plan, have good design and maintenance, checking, acting, etc., etc. So that's what I suggest people do on trips. So, in terms of slips, I wrote a book about this. Everybody today is going to get a PDF copy of this book. That's part of your digital goodie bag. It got to Amazon bestseller for safety books and insurance books, which was pretty cool. And in the book, there's a 5-step method, which is assess, amend, advocate, assure, affirm. I haven't got time to go through all of that today. You are going to get a copy of the book, though. But I'm going to focus in on assess, which is about understanding, and amend, which is about making some changes and some improvements. And I'm going to give you 3 principles that kind of span those 2 areas. So 3 things you could go away and think about today. So when it comes to slips, I like to use this analogy of being a concert orchestra. And if you're the conductor, you might have the best strings section in the world. You might have the best percussion section in the world. But if you've got a rubbish trombonist, then everything's going to fall apart. And you need to have that harmony working well together in order to achieve what you want to achieve. And the harmony when it comes to slip safety is what I call chimes. So these are the 6 reasons why somebody might slip. C is for contamination. That's what is on the floor. If the floor is perfectly clean and perfectly dry, it's not going to be slippery, but any type of contamination is going to make it more slippery. H is heel. That's all about footwear. One big issue is that not all safety shoes are slip resistant. So this is, it merits more investigation to make sure that the safety shoe that might have a steel toe cap and ankle protection, is it giving you the right level of slip resistance? I is for individual. This is all about people. So statistically, if you're an 80-year-old lady, you're more likely to slip and to be injured than if you're a 20-year-old man. But really, this is about activities. So pushing, pulling, twisting, turning, carrying, being distracted, rushing, all of these things make a slip more likely. M is maintenance, and we've spoken about cleaning, we've spoken about wear and tear and changes over time. And there's also change of use. If you reconfigure buildings, you need to bear that in mind. E is environment. So this is obviously the weather, rain, condensation, and things like that. But it's also the built environment, steps and stairs, ramps and slopes, entrance matting, lighting, noise. All of these things will contribute to slip risk. And then S is surface, the floor. So some floors clearly are more slip resistant than others. And there's a way of measuring that, which I'll talk to you about in a minute. So to manage slip risk, I always say you've got to tune your chimes. So you need to have that kind of composer view and say, right, we've got to try and do well in these 6 areas as much as we can. Clearly, sometimes you can't control certain aspects, but in many, many occasions, you can do something in all 6 areas, and that's what I recommend people do. Now, if you're interested to know how you're doing on chimes, we've got a self-assessment tool. Again, I'll send you a copy of this in the digital goodie bag. It's called the Slip Prevention Scorecard. You answer a series of questions. It takes about 3 to 4 minutes, and it'll give you a score for each of the chimes. So it'll tell you how well you're doing currently on contamination, heal, individual, etc. And it'll give you an overall score. So I'd really recommend that as a really concrete next step or first step that you could take. So once we understand our chimes, then what do we need to do? Well, if you think about driving your car, I've had some bad luck with cars over the years, notwithstanding being run over, but just generally with my own cars, I mean here. You can be driving your car and it feels fine and it's driving well and, and you're pretty happy with it. But once a year, you have to take it in for an MOT. And what does the MOT do? The MOT does some quantitative diagnostic, and they check certain things that aren't maybe obvious to you as the user of the car. And that science can give you some insights as to where there might be some hidden risks that you weren't aware of. And in the field of slip safety, the kind of equivalent to an MOT, I suppose, would be to do a slip test. And this is a graphic of a device called a pendulum test. This is what the HSE use, it's what the courts use, the insurers use. And I'm going to show you a video in a second of it. It mimics the physics of walking on a floor and your heels striking. And when you test a floor, it gives you a number. And the great thing about this is you're then getting away from the car feels fine to drive, or this floor doesn't feel that slippery to me, into what does the diagnostic say about the car and what does this quantitative testing say about the floor. So I'll just show you the video here. So he's going to spray the floor with water. He's going to swing the foot, release the foot of the pendulum. It's called a pendulum because it swings. It's going to swing from right to left. And as it swings to the left, watch how the foot strikes the floor and imagine that that's somebody's heel when they're walking. And then you'll see it swing through to the left and it pushes a pointer onto a gauge on the side of the machine here. So I'll show it to you again. So sprays the floor with water, releases the foot, swings through, and then goes through to the left and leaves that pointer on the gauge. So the benefits of testing, I guess, are twofold. One is that we can truly understand where we are and what the risk is of our floors causing a slip. So the output of the test is called a pendulum test value, and there are categories of slip potential. There's high, moderate, and low slip potential. And you can also equate the pendulum test value, the PTV, to an accident risk exposure. This is HSE data. So if we start on the right, if we've got a PTV score of 36, we have a low slip potential, and we have a 1 in 1 million accident risk exposure. If we move further down to the left, we've got a PTV of 24, which is a high slip potential, and an accident risk exposure of 1 in 20. So the testing allows us to plot ourselves on this chart and figure out, right, where actually are we based on the science, not on opinion. And then obviously if we're down towards the left, what can we then do to reduce that risk? So we get to quantify the risk and therefore understand it well. Second benefit of the testing is it helps you in claims defensibility. So David Scott is an insurance claims lawyer. He defends claims in the hospitality and leisure sector. And David was on my podcast, and we were talking about somebody in a hotel swimming pool, and the floor is wet, and they slip over and they hurt themselves. And David said that that person would think they're entitled to make a claim. He said, no, if I'm the hotel and I have proof of compliant slip test data, I would expect to defend that claim. And this is often a light bulb moment for people because the perception seems to be for most people that if the floor was wet, if someone legitimately slipped, and if they legitimately hurt themselves, then basically they're going to bring a claim and they're going to succeed. And what David's saying, and this is what he does for a living, is no, because if we can prove with the science that the floor exceeded the HSE benchmark for what they would deem as safe, then we've discharged our duty of care and therefore we should expect to defend that claim. So we've got chimes, we've got testing and quantifying and bringing in the science. And then the last principle I want to speak about is around taking a zonal approach. And there's a lot of car and motor related examples in this talk from somebody that got run over. Perhaps I've got PTSD, I don't know, but it's a great example. So why do we have 20-mile-an-hour zones in city centres and in towns and outside schools and places like that versus having a 70-mile-an-hour speed limit on a motorway? Well, clearly because the risk of going at 70 is much greater and someone getting hurt is much greater in a built-up area. So it kind of makes perfect sense that we have a zonal approach to road safety. And what HSE would say, and what a risk assessment-based approach would say, and what I absolutely advocate is that we should have a risk-based zonal approach for slips as well. Where most organizations, in my experience, go wrong is they have a one-size-fits-all approach. They have a blanket document, normally one page, very generic, deals with everything in the same way, and that gives rise to problems. If we think about this shopping centre, for example, there are certain areas marked in red where we know it's very likely the floor's going to get wet. But there are massive, massive areas in green where we know the floor isn't going to get wet unless we're cleaning it or there's a temporary spillage. And in most buildings, I'd say that green zone is probably 95% of the floor areas. So in those areas, let's keep the floor clean, let's keep the floor dry, and let's deal with spillages. And that's all we need to do. But in the other areas, that's not enough because we can't keep those floors dry. We can't necessarily keep them clean of all contamination. So we need to do more in certain areas. Bringing that to life a little bit, let's think about entrance matting as one example of this. So many people think that if they've got entrance matting, that means that the floor beyond that matting is a dry area. And you can see here from this photograph of a train station that on a wet day, even with quite significant matting, the floor is wet well beyond the edge of that matting. So what's matting supposed to do? It's supposed to dry your feet before you get onto the floor. Most matting is too small to actually do that. It's often not maintained well. It's often not the right material as well. But fundamentally, the biggest thing is it's too small. And the table here in the top right is HSE and Entrance Flooring Association data. And what this says is that if you have a peak traffic flow per hour of 400 people going through an entrance, you should have 6 to 7 meters of built-in matting. So if you think about a convenience store on a high street, they probably get 400 people an hour at peak traffic flow coming through the door. How much matting do they normally have? 50 centimeters if you're lucky. So therefore, that matting is almost irrelevant because it's not possible for that matting to dry people's feet enough. So if you haven't got enough matting, you need to be really, really thinking, okay, the entrances, these are red zones, these are foreseeably wet areas, and then we need to think about what we can do to mitigate the risk, bearing in mind that we know that floor is going to be wet. So how do we tie all this together, these three principles? So we would do slip testing of a building. We overlay that with that zonal approach, and then we use the chimes to manage the risk depending on the zonal approach and the slip testing results. So we look at the key zones, the red zones, the orange zones. What are the slip testing results? If they're a problem, right, which of the chimes can we use to manage the risk better? And that's how we achieve safety when it comes to slip safety. So bringing that to life, this is a slide we give to people in our reports that we deliver when we do these kinds of surveys. So let's think about a hotel, and we're on the 5th floor, and we're looking at the corridor between the guest bedrooms. Let's say we slip test that floor, and it's slippery when it's wet. It's got a high slip potential. But we know already, because of where it is, zonally, it's only going to get wet when we're cleaning it or when there's an unexpected spillage. Therefore, we don't really need to worry about that. Doesn't matter how slippery the floor is. You can have the slipperiest floors you want in dry areas, because if they're not getting wet or contaminated, then they're not slippery. But let's imagine that we then go down to the swimming pool of this hotel, and actually the exact same floor is in place around the swimming pool as it is in that corridor. So we've got the high slip potential, but this time we've got a floor that's getting wet frequently, regularly, foreseeably, whichever word you want to use, foreseeably being the legal word. Well, that's a problem. The floor's slippery. It's getting wet. We know it's getting wet. It's designed to get wet in that case, and therefore that's not safe. That's an issue we need to address. So hopefully that's given you a few things to think about. If I could sort of sum it up, hopefully you'll agree with what I've said, that these three things are true. Slips are serious, so it's the biggest cause of accidents, injuries, and claims. We see lots of very serious slips, much more serious than people think in terms of, oh, someone's grazed their knee. No, we see life-altering injuries from slips all the time, and we also see occasional fatalities, as I alluded to earlier. And from a cost perspective, it's only getting worse. It's not getting better. Hopefully, you also agree, based on what I've showed, that slips are scientific. So there is a science to this. That's exactly what my book is about. That's why it's called Slipology. It's about bringing science into the world of slips. So if we take a scientific approach, we absolutely can make an impact in this area. And that leads into the third thing. Slips are definitely stoppable. I've shared some examples of that with you today. So hopefully that's what you think. And then hopefully what you would feel is that this is something, you'd agree with me, that this is something worthwhile to do. Most people here will have either had to deal with a slip in their own business, or they'll know someone that slipped, or probably most of us would have multiple examples. It's something that does affect many, many people. Years ago, HSE did a campaign called Shattered Lives, talking about how slips shatter lives. And I absolutely see that again and again. And I suppose the key thing is, look, if we can, as safety professionals, go away and take a scientific approach to this problem, rather than just doing the basics, then we can have confidence, we can have certainty that we're doing something that is measurable, that's tangible, that's real, that's practical, and therefore that can give us that confidence that we know we're doing our best to keep people safe. So that's it from me. I'm happy if anyone does have any questions, if you want to go and raise your hand, or I'll have a quick look in the chat. I haven't been monitoring the chat, but I'll have a quick look in the chat and see if there's anything, or if anybody has seen anyone asking any questions. It's not
Hello,
pink,
Christian.
says
How are you
Carla.
doing?
I like
Christian,
that.
It's Dan Wilkins. How you
Oh,
doing?
hi, Dan. How are you, mate?
Yes, I'm good. I'm good. Excellent webinar actually over the last couple of hours. Has been really good, really insightful. So, yeah, I would just pretty support what you've been saying in terms of, I think it's so important that we do get these sort of sense checks and bring in the right expertise as well, especially where slips, trips, and falls are concerned. Recently we've had sort of an increase, whether that's due to the weather conditions, inappropriate footwear. There's so many sort of layering systems, isn't there? But I also recall you delivering a session for the IOS group for the Edinburgh branch as well.
Yeah.
And that was really well accepted. So I strongly encourage people to, even if it's just to go on and just sort of read your profile, what you're all about. And yeah, I think they'll find some useful information there that they can take away.
Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And have you been watching the snooker?
I have indeed. Yes, I have indeed. I've been keeping up to date with all that bits and pieces, but I'm pretty much occupied with a garden now where it's entering the, what we hope is spring. It's dry and sunny here, Christian. So we've got it all going on.
Good stuff. Good stuff.
But no, thanks very much. It's been a brilliant webinar.
Yeah, no, pleasure. Thank you for joining. Great. Well, look, we've got a little bit of time left, and so what we're going to do now is I'm going to invite Carla, Louise, and Davey back. I'm going to just spotlight, not just me, don't worry. I'm going to spotlight everyone else, and we're going to have a little discussion. Although I can't see Davey. Has he done a runner?
Davey done a runner? He's probably dancing around. You see, you're dancing around, aren't you, Davey?
He's here. There he is. Oh, he's changed. He's changed.
Yeah, you should be able to see me.
Let me find you. Hold on. Add spotlight. Perfect. There we go. Fantastic.
Oh my goodness. It's like a new location. Is that real or is that a backdrop?
Oh, you're muted, Davey.
Sorry, it's real. It's our training barn. Had to change locations. They needed the green screen room.
Well, next time you need a green screen, I can just lend you my shirt, and then it's not a problem at all. Thank you guys for your contributions today. It's been really, really excellent, I think, and the feedback in the chats has been very positive as well. So I wanted to wrap up with just a bit of a panel discussion, and then give the opportunity for anybody else in the audience to ask any further questions or give any comments or whatever. So if you're live with us in the audience and you want to say something, just go to reactions, raise your hand, and we'll bring you up. We'll bring you up at the end. So we've covered a lot today. I'm keen to sort of make this as practical as we can. So I just wondered, maybe in terms of thinking about diagnostics. So I covered some of that in my session. Lots of organizations, as Louise said, are busy with safety activity, but maybe we're not seeing as much improvement as that activity would perhaps merit. What would be some of the more common things that you see that kind of looks like progress, but actually isn't? So if anybody wants to take that one on first.
Everybody's being terribly polite. Everybody's being terribly polite. I wonder. One of the things that's come up recently is around management of hazardous substances. And what's quite interesting, you talked about it, and Louise talked about it too, about data. And I think in this country we tend to be very good at trying to cross all the T's and dot all the I's in terms of compliance. But people will do things like risk assessment and they'll have like systems. So they'll go, oh, we've got a posh new system in place, which looks on the outside like progress. But then they'll do risk assessments for things and then they won't follow up or look at the controls. But they also won't find their starting point. So Louise talked about it earlier, data. Christian, you talked about evidence. What's the point in doing any of those things if you haven't got any evidence? So when it comes to things like occupational hygiene in the UK, I think we're not particularly very good at that. We're not very good at, managing things like wells. So I was thinking about chemical exposure. People will say, well, we don't actually expose people to those chemicals. And we would say the same thing with slips. What you were saying, Christian, and Louise, what you were saying is a bit like, where's the data to back up that that claim. Whereas, so it looks like progress. Oh, we got a fancy new COSH system. Lovely.
Yeah.
We've got 452 COSH risk assessments. Okay, have you read any of them? Have you done anything with them? Is there any data to show that you comply with the like legislative requirements? So that was one of the things, like the basic things I was thinking about that I see recently.
Yeah, no, that's good. Davey, there must be some stuff that people do a lot of in your sort of manual handling world that actually isn't really helping, but sort of people perceive that it is.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's a lot of myths and fallacies associated with manual handling, and they seem to think. I think you touched on it yourself a little bit. Was, well, I've done the training. That's okay, isn't it? And it's
Hmm.
so insufficient now. Number one, we need to know, is the training correct? Because the myths and fallacies that are out there. And then, is it effective? And this is where we were very fortunate to be able to get that behavior change, because it could physically feel a difference. And that was such a key changer in driving down accidents. And you know, they're unprecedented when you get it right. But I would say, one, the training, is it correct? And training just isn't enough. You need that sustainability program to back it up.
Yeah, definitely agree there. Louise, anything from a sort of
Yeah.
leadership and sort of governance perspective where you sort of see that, we're trying, but it's not really doing what we think it is.
Yeah, so I mean, I kind of started my presentation saying we are doing a lot of stuff, you know? We're doing a lot of audits. We're doing all these, we might be going out and doing investigations into why things are happening. Um, and as you can imagine, I'm going to tackle this from a strategic perspective. Is something that I often say is, you know, we need to be strategic about where we're putting our resource because it's finite. And what are the 5 things that we can do that deal with the 55 below? So my challenge is always to my teams, tell me the top 3 things that we need to do. And we need to be much more strategic in our approaches, because if our teams are, on the ground being busy, doing incident investigations and helping and supporting people on the ground, which is really, really, really important, but actually, we've got systemic issues across the organization and we're not tackling it on a strategic level, we're going to be running on a treadmill, and
Yeah,
that's potentially going to be holding us back.
yeah. Agree with you there. I think, and that's part of what I was alluding to in my slide about sort of that return on effort curve, isn't it? It's kind of, yeah, we're doing some stuff, but can we just do that bit better? And I think that's probably one challenge I'd give everyone here today is that's joining us is try and have some time and space. And Louise, you mentioned this,
I know it's
having
been absolutely
yeah,
phenomenal for me, because I've kind of gone away and I've said, right, okay, I've worked with a huge number of organizations on transformation. And certainly, if I think back to being IOS chair of council, some of the changes that we made there when I was chair of council in respect of how council operated to get that language change between council and the board, so that actually that level is working more effectively, where we're communicating with leaders in their language, because as Carla said, they don't get what we're talking about. So it's safety, and I'm seeing it in the governance training that I'm doing at the moment, is that safety is seen as compliance. It's not seen as a strategic risk within
mm,
organizations.
yeah,
So
definitely. Okay.
Louise is right, isn't she? When we talk about risk, it's all about I've got to tick a box. That needs to be sorted. Oh, I've done that now. And I was saying about Kosh, that's a perfect example of where people think they're progressing, and they go, oh yeah, all of those are done, and we've got this fancy new system, and boom, boom, boom. Look, we've got 300 active risk assessments that don't need reviewing. But that's not what I would call progress. Are the risks being managed? That's the fundamental question. Is it safe? Like, I feel like it's a movie. We have to ask ourselves the questions. Is it safe? Do you remember the movie where it's like everything every 5 minutes was, is it safe? That's the question.
We should speak to Netflix and we should pitch a new version of Is It Cake, but it's Is It Safe?
Yeah, absolutely. But Louis, Christian, you said it, David said it, we're all saying the same things. We're all talking about different subjects, but we're all saying exactly the same thing. In terms of leadership, strategic leadership, there's such a disconnect between the language that we use and the way it's understood. And that financial, they're not. I almost think that we should all do cost benefit analysis for everything so that the board can understand that managing risk is financially astute. And if you, yeah, exactly what Louise is saying, if they don't manage risk, they may end up losing their business, or they may end up having to pay out an awful lot of money that if they just been a bit more Mystic Meg, they would be able to foresee that would happen, if you see what I mean. Channel your inner Mystic Meg, Christian.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you know that's sorry, Christian, I was going to just come in and say, it's so true, because the amount of times I've been in major organizations and looked at the safety procedures and training records, they're amazing. The training looks absolutely fantastic on paper. The safe systems to work are great. And they're all giving themselves high fives, high fives. Look at our system. It's fantastic. It's fantastic. Then you go out to the coal face and you ask the guys at the coal face, it's that disconnect I related to in the beginning of my presentation. It's not even touched the first base. And that's where some of the big problems lie.
Yeah, and Dan just put it in there, like the safety professionals, they're so overwhelmed these days. And Louise has just answered Dan, but Dan's right, everybody's so overwhelmed with all the kind of different things that they need to achieve, but they forget to ask the basic question, is it safe? Like, is the company safe? Is the risk being managed in the way that we would expect it to be managed? Do people understand the concept of SAFAR as reasonably practicable? In reality, you get to choose as an organization how much risk you're willing to take. You actually fundamentally do that, but you need to be clear to the people that work for you. And if Bob, who works in the stores, doesn't understand that, what hope have we got of getting those people engaged? So it does, it filters, it proliferates throughout the whole organization.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that I often talk about is, and apologies if you've heard me say this before, but I've done lots of polls on LinkedIn, for example, saying, how often when you take a new safety role do you see things you can improve? Is it always, often, sometimes, or never? And whenever I do that poll, I do it every so often. It's pretty much always 85% are saying always or often. So most of the time, the vast majority of the time, we as safety professionals are saying, when I start a new role, I can find things to improve. And the sort of mirror I like to try and shine on that is, well, if that is the case, you know, Carla's taking Louise's job, she can find things to improve. Louise is taking Davey's job, she can find things to improve. Davey's taking, if we can always find things to improve when other people have done the work before us, we can probably find a lot of things to improve if we're just willing to look in the mirror and willing to take that step back and be a bit self-critical and say, are we doing this right? As you said, Carla, is this actually safe?
Yeah, it's a fundamental question, and sometimes we as safety professionals can make it too academic and we can overcomplicate the basic question. But the thing is, are we actually fundamentally managing the level of risk? And I think that sometimes gets lost in the myriad of tick boxes. And as Davey said, that all of those kind of different things, we've got like gold-plated policies and procedures. Look, woohoo, high five. But it is about continuous improvement, and it is about being self-critical as both professionals, but within the organization. Oh, Dan's giving us some love there. Love back to you, Dan. Love back to you.
I think Maurice has got a question.
Go on,
He
Maurice.
he wants to. I asked him, and he wants to do it at the end, so that's fine. So
Okay.
I'm gonna call him up at the end. Don't worry. I'm doing my best webinar hosting impersonation as I possibly can.
Can I just respond to Dan's
Yeah.
message as well? Is that Dan, I see this all the time. There is too much for us to do if we're dealing with reactive stuff. And we're never gonna, there isn't an organization on the planet that will have a safety team that's big enough, particularly in a high hazard environment, if the overall maturity of the organization is low. So we have to learn about change management. We have to learn about a much more strategic approach, and we have to prioritize. We cannot deal with everything at the same time because the organization can't take it. So we've got to
Yeah.
look for ways to slow down, to speed up.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely, Louise. I totally agree with that. And that, organizations like you says, there's not one out there that's got all their ducks in a row, and I think it's so important to sort of prioritize, whether that's with a rag status or, low, medium or high, however you do it, it's got to be prioritized, and there's so much we spoke about, or you guys have spoke about on this forum, manual handling, cost to sear, Lola has Legionellas, audits, leadership, risk assessments, procedures, safe systems, where all these things, and it's all being bolted on to maybe a team of individuals, a small team, or one person, and then we've got to think about the environmental aspect and sustainability. So yeah, I not well, me personally, I don't know what everybody else is thinking, but you do sort of feel overwhelmed and absolutely swamped with a number of things we've got to do, and then we've got ISO audits coming in. But don't get me wrong, those ISO audits are a vehicle to get leverage for change as well. And I've actually used that to push things across the table and say, X, Y, and Z, and get our point across as a team. So no, I totally agree with everything that's been said on this webinar, really. And Carla has actually, she spoke so much sense in the last 5, 10, 15 minutes. And it's just absolutely brilliant and refreshing to hear actually people coming out of being honest and upfront and having these discussions as well. So thank you very much to all of you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's just to as safety leaders, and I'm finding a newfound purpose these days because I've got space. It's we have to drive a change that takes our organizations from reactive to proactive. So I asked questions earlier on about maturity frameworks, and do go back and look at the Bradley curve and think about how you can apply that in your organization, because people think they're the experts in safety because they can see this myriad of things that are wrong. But actually, to go back to my presentation, when we start raising those concerns in that way with leadership, they will shut down and we won't get the impact that we need within the organization. So what I'm suggesting with choice chain is that this is about a series of decisions that are made when we're not in the room. So how can we tweak our language and our communication style so that we're speaking the same language of the boardroom, and support and help leaders?
Yeah, really, really important. Davey's had to go. He's got to catch a flight, so he's headed off. But thank you to him, and I really appreciate his contributions. Something that you said there, Louise, about being seen as the expert because you can diagnose lots of problems. I think that is a really big challenge for us, because I think the understanding from lots of boards is, well, you're the health and safety person, you must know how to solve all these
Yeah.
problems. And the reality is that the job of being the health and safety leader, whatever the job title is a bit more like being a GP, not a surgeon. So it is that diagnostic, and it's that sort of course setting, but actually you can't physically know how to solve every single problem that might exist in a safety sense across the whole business. You can't. It's not possible for someone to do that. I always talk about if you think of knowledge as like a piece of dough and you can sort of shape it, if you've got to have your knowledge of being a mile wide, then you've got to flatten that dough, and it's only ever going to be very, very thin. It's not going to have much depth. So I think a lot of it is explaining that back up, isn't it? And managing up. And the CEO, well, the CEO can't do everything under the sun in the business. They understand that, but you need to sort of explain to them that you're kind of like them and within your bit of the business.
And it's getting that buy, something I've learned is, getting the buy-in of relevant stakeholders. And somebody else asked a question, is something that I do within organizations is I create stakeholder groups. Again, something I started probably 25 years ago is what I call steering groups. And so it's pulling together, looking at how we can create stakeholder groups that will not only give you a perspective and a view, but they will help solve problems, they will innovate, they will then help us to turn our strategy into deliverables that shift the conversation forward. The other, just to raise another point, is that something else I've been doing, it's like, don't give me time again, because I might just change the world, is that I've been learning about AI, and the power that we have now in AI is phenomenal. And I think the I've heard people speak in the past about us being behind the curve when it comes to tech. Well, actually, we've got an opportunity now, because let's reinvent ourselves and start using AI. So all of this data that we capture, we're able to actually understand it much more clearly and focus on the data that we need, just not move into this big data landscape. Whilst we're still going to need our human element, because we live in the world of people, so that's not going to take anything away from us. It's just going to enhance what we do. I think it's hugely powerful tool for good in our industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a big fan of that. I'm conscious of time. I want to be kind of respectful that we've taken a little bit longer from people than we had said, and I do want to give a bit of time for questions. So I'll ask each of you just one final question, then we'll open it up to any Q&A from the audience. So if someone's joined us today, what's one practical action that they could take in the next 30 days that would really make a difference to achieve, 2026 being their safest year yet?
So for me, I would say go and talk to people. It seems like a really basic thing that when we first start in safety, everybody always says to us, oh, we need to learn how to communicate. Uh, Internally review the way you communicate with people and go out there and talk to people at all levels. So knowing how to do that is incredibly important. And Louise, whilst you've been talking, people have been putting things in the chat, but go out there and discuss with people. Try and find out, ask the question, does everybody in the organization understand what risk is? So go and ask people the question, do you understand what risk is? And see their responses, because we see this every single day. You ask the question and you see a blank face. And risk is so fundamental and it's so interrelated within an organization. It's not just about safety. It's not just about health. It's about the organization. And if we all want to keep our jobs and be more productive in the UK and all of these kind of things, we need to understand how it fits with an organization as part of it. It's the heart of running an organization, is being able to manage risk effectively. That's my point, I would say. Go and ask people.
Fantastic. Louise?
I'd say in terms of what we can do as individual professionals, I would, particularly if you're running on reaction, is go back to the Bradley curve and think about what your top 3 priorities are and really concentrate on that, and then use some of the techniques that we've been describing, which are behavioral, which are strategic, to advocate for a purpose in the organization that puts well-being at the heart of that organization for long-term sustainability and true sustainability. So that's an advocate, be an advocate for that, but prioritize and don't try to do everything. What are your top 3 things that can make the biggest impact in your organization?
Yeah, love that. Stephen in the chat here said we've got to stop people saying they're very busy and don't have the time. We can always find the time. I think that's very true, isn't it? People, people will always find the time for things that they prioritize. So it's not a question of time, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but the billionaires in the world have the same amount of time as the rest of us. And the high performing athletes have the same amount of time as the rest of us, don't they? So it's all about what we actually prioritize. And that's one thing I'm worried about with AI and stuff is how people's attention spans are waning and stuff. But we won't get into that. We won't get into that for now. Let's take any final questions. Maurice, you had your hand up for a while, so do you want to give us a question or a comment or whatever you wanted to say?
Yeah, question for both Carla and Louise. What are the biggest challenge you faced in your safety initiatives, and how did you address that challenge?
Oh, good question.
I think Louise and I are probably going to say something quite similar. I have a funny feeling. I think it's convincing. I think it's to do with convincing that the senior leadership team that they own risk. One of the things that I think has really been my biggest challenge when I go in and I deliver to kind of large boards, say, for example, in healthcare or in the NHS, for example, is that they own risk and risk is not emotional. So convincing them that the way that they feel about risk is not actually the same as tangible risk. And also getting them to understand that they own it. So a lot of the time they go, well, I've appointed a health and safety person. That's their problem. That's why I've employed them and all the rest of it. And they almost outsource it mentally. But I think convincing them, it takes a lot of work because people run organizations and they think that if they appoint that person, and that person, that's okay. And they seriously lack the understanding often that risk firmly sits with them. So that's my view. I think Louise probably might say something quite similar, actually.
I mean, it is helping and supporting leaders to understand, I have an ability to go in and make change within an organization, but that doesn't take away anything that the leadership needs to do. And that gap is absolutely tangible. And where an organization, particularly where an organization is at very low maturity, and nothing has really happened, they believe that actually, because we've been operating in this way for however many years, we're going to continue to be sustainable. But the world is changing very, very rapidly.
So, Louise, yeah, sorry, I'm just thinking about what you were saying. So, yesterday we heard a case from one of the lawyers. We were at a transport conference with a team of lawyers, and they told us about a case where a company had been operating for many years, and they were a transport company, no problems, no problems. They had a safety professional, they had competent advice, they appeared to have everything just so. The HSC came in on an inspection, they found 9 different things that were wrong. At the end of the whole process, they prosecuted them for 4 offences, and yet they had nothing that had ever happened. They'd never had an incident. And our view is that we only get prosecuted if something happens, but it's not the case. And I think they ended up getting a £25,000 fine just for not having a suitable and sufficient risk assessment in a particular area. And that was after the lawyers negotiated all of the mitigating factors. And we believe that we're fine. We go, well, we've got some safety professional, we've got this, we've got that. And there's that belief that just because nobody's approached us so far that it's all good and that we haven't had an accident, it's all good. It's all good. But they don't know, do they?
I think it's this piece of, and I mentioned, the Vale Dam disaster, which I've been looking at on my governance course recently. And it's, in that particular case, a technical expert said this dam is fine. And actually what happened was the leadership, that gave them it was a confirmation bias. And so it just goes to show that safety is seen as compliance. If I have a piece of paper or somebody's told me it's safe, I've discharged my responsibilities. And so it's actually bringing it back to be something that's tangible, that's difficult. And in my presentation, I talked about the knock-on effects that our transformational programs have. And that's triggering when you talk to leaders about that, and they freeze. And so that's probably my biggest challenge.
definitely. Yeah, can resonate with that one. Well, look, thank you so much. Oh, Alan,
Oh,
you've got your hand
Alan's
up.
got
Go
his
on.
hand
Go on,
up.
Alan.
Alan Plum, the gorgeous, lovely Alan Plum.
It was literally just to say thank you. And Christian, thanks for flagging it up. And it's been a few years since I've been alongside Louise, so it was great to see you again.
I'm back, Alan.
Yeah. But the presentations, I did put something in the chat after Davy's session that it took me back to the 80s when my background is in agriculture and farm safety, ex-HSE inspector and so on. And we used this giant of a man called Jeff Capes, if ever you remember him. He's the world's strongest man and all that. And I've also put a comment subsequently about know your audience. And what we did with Jeff Capes was really what Davey was intimating. We had Jeff in an arena in front of lots of farmers at county shows with a tiny guy who came up to about his waist, to be honest, Ray Pettit. And Jeff did all the talking, but he got Ray to do all the handling. And it was all about how you approach it and plan it and avoid it and everything. So it is about knowing your audience. That's the key. And that chimes with all you're talking about with leadership. I'm also aware of research which identifies in my own field different attitudes towards risk. And the research went on to analyze how you need to speak to individuals to convey your message effectively. Some do need telling, and then the big stick, but there's other various approaches. And so there's lots of good stuff around there looking at behavioral studies and so on. But no, great start. And Christian, we can talk in the margins about what you might do about slips in agriculture, but I do fear it's a forlorn hope. The only other comment I'd make is, Louise, I thought you might like my picture. I've got a halo around my head. That was a wonderful cloud formation I saw out of my front window one day, and I rushed out and took a photograph. So there you go.
You're looking great, and it's great to have your energy on the call, Alan.
I'm just trying to be retired, but it doesn't work when there's always interesting things to
Don't
join
bother.
in.
There's just too much work for you to be doing.
Too much to
Anyway,
do.
you must all go, but thank you. It's been a good morning.
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, and thank you to everybody that's joined us today. Obviously, special thanks to Davey, to Louise, and Carla as well. I hope everybody has got some good practical insights from this. I hope it's made you think a bit differently, and I hope it's inspired you to try to, as we suggested at the start, make 2026 your safest year yet. We will put out the full recording of this on YouTube, and we'll share that to the attendees, and we'll send you your digital goodie bag as well. Keep the conversation going, and if you want us to do more stuff like this, let us know, because I'm sure we'd all be happy to arrange another session at some point soon as well. So yeah, thank you
Well,
so much,
this is
everybody.
the first time I've talked about the choice chain, so I'm hoping that we'll create some noise from this, and just let's start quoting the choice chain.
Good stuff. All right, thanks everybody.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers.